me pitching strategy. Good.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to the City Council Work Study Session here in the Tempe History Museum for August 27, 2019. So tonight, the agenda has a number of items that the City Council must consider in order to continue to conduct our city business. One of the things on the first item on our agenda is our call to the audience. If you could, I have one card for the call to, actually I have two cards. The first one is Kim Gaffney-Loza. Kim, if you want to come forward, state your name and place of residence for the record, and you can have up to 3 minutes.
Hi, I'm Kim Gaffney-Loza from North Tempe, and you all know how passionate I am about the desert park, so we don't even have to go there exactly. But I really would like you to consider how important I think this Desert Conservation Commission is. We have a lot of stakeholders in the park, a lot of people who use it for all different uses, including commercial, with SRP, and ASU has a presence there as well. And when they use the park, they have a certain focus, a certain lens that they look through. And I don't think that always those lenses allow them to see how much impact they have over the other, not only uses of the park, but the health of the park. We just recently had an incident in Evelyn Holman Park where SRP came in to put in new poles and left about 1.5 acres, pretty much a dust bowl. I don't think SRP went in there intending, to impact our park. They were focused on getting their job done and what they needed to get done. What I think would be great about this commission is having those stakeholders together so that this can be a working commission where they can actually have expertise in different areas that could bring solutions forward for different things and then share it with the group so it helps educate all the stakeholders about the impacts that they're having. And it will help the health of the park in the long term because there will be ongoing changes in our environment, which will affect the ecosystems that are in the park. There's probably going to be changes in the city, the uses of the park, and to have a group who protect that desert preserve, for generations to come. This is really unique to have a piece of desert like this in the middle of an urban environment. And I think we've got something very special there. So I really hope that you consider moving this forward. The only thing that I would like to see that I did not see in the memorandum is I did not see somebody from the Native American community, which has a big stake in the preserve as well. So I really hope you consider that also. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I think we do have someone represented for the Native American community on there.
I think that's even SRP MIC. But we
can check. All right. Thank you, Kim. Next is John Christoph. Please state your name, place of residence for the record.
My name is John Christoph. I live in McClintock and Apache. Most of you have interacted with me at some point before. Some of you I have not yet fully properly met. But the basic issue that I want to raise is something that I also raised yesterday evening at the Development Planning Commission.
Excuse me, would you mind having a seat so we can hear you on the microphone? Thank you.
I was doing what the last person did, sorry. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Just to reiterate for the recording, my name is John Christoph. I live at 1811 East Apache Boulevard. Anyway, basically what I want to bring today is a similar point to what I made yesterday late in the evening at the Development Review Commission meeting about their Urban Core Master Plan review, as well as I understand Vice Mayor Kuby is going to be bringing forward a plan for reducing arterial street speed limits. My background is in geosciences and materials engineering, and I have a fair degree of expertise in sustainability, as I know many of you do here as well. But something that I think is important to note is that we're going to have to decarbonize by 2050 completely if we are to avert 2 degrees centigrade global warming, and Tempe has stepped up and do its part. So we have plans like the Urban Core Master Plan that are going to allow us to accommodate for population growth by 2040 in a sustainable way, but that still leaves us 10 years once that's fully implemented to get from most of Tempe still being car dependent and using lots of energy for transportation and living in highly inefficient suburban homes to a completely carbon-free solution. The way that we have to achieve decarbonization has to involve some degree of changing our mode split for transportation, getting people out of cars and using things like the buses, bicycling, light rail, and walking. And in order to do that, we have to have safe streets. We have to have complete streets that are usable for everybody, regardless of the mode they use. And right now, we don't have that. 3 lanes of traffic that are 12 or 14 feet wide in each direction on an arterial street is just dangerous. Never mind if they're going 45 miles an hour, at which speed, if you're hit by a car, you're 90% likely to die. Ideally, I'd like to see these limits reduced to 25 miles per hour, where if you're hit by a car as a pedestrian, you have a 90% chance of surviving. But I understand the proposal that's going to be put forward later today doesn't go that far. It gives you about an even chance of survival. What I will say is that is a good step forward, and it is necessary, but we do need to keep going further. And I am proud to live in a city where we have a city government that is committed to a progressive vision of the future that is inclusive for all its citizens. And I want to reinforce for all of you the need to include non-motorists, people who are disabled, mobility impaired, children, elderly folks, anybody who cannot be accommodated by owning a personal vehicle and driving it everywhere has to be included in this decision. So thanks all for your great work on this, and I look forward to seeing the results.
Thank you. That's all the cards I have. Is there anyone else in the audience wishing to address us on any of the items that's listed on this agenda? Could you please get my attention? Seeing none, close that portion and move on to the issue review items. First one, item 2A, is an update on an urban core master plan and a transit-oriented development urban code district and general plan amendment. And I believe, before we get started with this presentation, I want to thank staff for all the hard work on this huge planning project. It's so important that we proactively plan for growth for Tempe, as well as what the growth we're going to be projected seeing throughout the county for the next decade or two. I think it's so important. And planning for growth is hard. It's hard work. It's challenging because there are competing interests. Not only do we continue to grow and evolve as a city, but we want to maintain our historic neighborhoods and our Tempe charm. We want to encourage the businesses with high-wage employees to locate here in our community, but also really desirable to really move throughout our downtown area, as well as to find parking. And we really need to find the right balance between these competing interests that we are working towards, that we're going to be hearing tonight. I really want to emphasize it. This is just an update for the process that we're moving forward. And we're still working towards finding that right balance that you're going to hear tonight. This is just an update, and then this plan is not set in stone at this time. But we're going to continue to get feedback from the stakeholders and so forth. So I just want to really make sure that that's there. And if Chad, you could start by reviewing the timeline for us, because this has been about, I think, a 2-year process, and with over 30 public meetings. But doesn't mean, we're not done. This is still a work in progress. And then if you can lead us on that, Chad, I'd greatly appreciate it.
Mayor, Council, thank you. Chad Weaver, Community Development. I do want to hit a few basic items here before I turn it over for the presentation. We do have some slides to show you. I also want to introduce the project team. They've done a tremendous amount of work and continue to keep me focused and keep us moving forward. We have Mbika Adakari, who will do most of the presentation as the project manager. We have Ryan Levesque next to me, who obviously is the planning deputy director. We have Robbie Aaron, who's done a tremendous amount of the background work and the mapping that I've been dependent on continually throughout this process. Shauna Warner in our neighborhoods group. And then we also have from transportation, Vanessa Spartan, Robert Yabez, who you may hear speak tonight, and Amanda Nelson, among many, many, many others, of course, that have been involved. So in terms of the timeline, that's the first thing I want to speak to. So I know that one of the things we've heard most recently in taking this to the public meetings and to the DRC most recently, as recently as last night, is there's too much too fast. And so we appreciate that. This is a complex document that we're bringing to you. So we're hoping to get some great feedback from you tonight that we can continue to move forward with and work towards resolution. At this point, with the DRC approval that we did gain last night, we have council to work with tonight, and we have a meeting scheduled in September and one in October. What we hope to do is follow through with those, because we really do need to get that second major general plan amendment at that October meeting, because of between between the state law and our local code, we're required to act on that in October. That action could be delayed till November or till December if we want to continue working on that. So at this point, the timeline is tonight, one reading in September, potential for a final reading in October, but also all options available to the council if they choose to delay it at that point. So we will continue to work as much as we can with everyone that has opinions, questions, comments, concerns. What we think the plan represents is a good balance between, as the mayor indicated, some occasionally competing interests. To the extent, though, that we find out from you all that we're a little off the mark on some of those, we have plenty of time to make some of those refinements as well. So one caveat, I guess, just to back up the full 2 years, as the mayor had indicated, to some of the initial impetus for what we were doing here, and why the plan looks as of now as it looks. We were experiencing tremendous growth back at that point, and there was some general dissatisfaction that the process relied on PADs. There wasn't a great level of expectation from the neighborhoods or the developers. So there was some discussion about creating a new vision that would provide us a little more guidance, a little more greater level of expectation in that regard. Some of the process issues could be smoothed out. We also had specifically a federal grant pursuant to the construction of the streetcar line to reconsider the TOD and to provide some new transit zoning on that line. So that really kicked off that effort. And so for the 2 years that we've been involved in this, we've been trying to figure out where growth would reasonably be placed, because we know the growth is coming, and Beek will go over a few of those numbers, and how we can make it beneficial to the city, generally speaking, whether it's through design or through the bonus provisions we'll talk about that could provide for affordable and workforce housing, things of that nature. So in terms of the issues that you're hearing about most recently, the timeline I've gone over, there have been some clarifications, some errors, some red lines that folks are bringing to us. We encourage that. To the extent there are other folks that still have those, we would take those. We will work diligently on trying to solve those issues and trying to present those to you all in a fashion that you can understand. Between the first DRC meeting and the second DRC meeting, we were able to, I think, put a lot of those concerns to bed amongst a few of the folks, but there are other folks we continue to work with. And if there are new folks we haven't talked to yet, we welcome those conversations as well. The last item is probably just based upon, again, the balance that we're trying to strike. We have specific requests out there that we're trying to be responsive to, but there are some for less development, less height, less density, and then some for more height, more development, more density. We're trying to stay balanced there, but obviously we can't address both of those sides. So to the extent that you can give us some guidance on that tonight, especially in terms of the different districts that we're going to promote, that would be fantastic too. That will help us move this thing along into September and October. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ambika to go through a bit of a slideshow and let you know what the update's about. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Mayor and council members, this is the third time we've come to you at the work study session. We started this program almost 20 months ago when you approved the contract in September, October 2017, and we had a kickoff in December, and then we continued. And then last year in 2018, we came to you in March, and we also came to you at the retreat in September. But as things were evolving, we gave you the general highlights at that point. Now we actually have the drafts of the documents. And like Chad mentioned, we'll go into a little more detail, and we'll not go into some of the other things that we talked before. The first slide, I just want to reiterate one more time that out of the three elements, the affordable housing strategy, the urban core master plan, and the TOD, the affordable housing strategy was adopted by the council on July 31st, so that's out. And so we have basically three documents and three requests that will be coming to you. The one that we took to the DRC twice. The three areas is, one is the urban core master plan. It's a policy plan. It will be adopted by resolution. It is to basically design to accommodate the growth by 2040. And it essentially delineates advisory areas of what kind of height and growth accommodation can happen. But in order to do that, it provides a lot of design guidelines, other planning documents and strategies and images on what kind of city we are looking at, sustainabilities and pedestrian environment and so on. The second one is the transportation overlay district that we started with that name, but because of certain legal and certain other logistic reasons, We're going to rename that to Urban Code District because the existing TOD will remain in the book in effect. And the Urban Code District will be a new section in the Tempe Zoning and Development Code. It will be an opt-in district. People have to actually sign in and voluntarily they will have to opt into the district. So that is the Urban Code District. I will refer to it as Urban Code District as we go forward. And the third element is to support the Urban Core Area Master Plan and also the Urban Code District. We are making a request to do a general plan amendment, and it happens to be a major general plan amendment because of the amount of the mixed use and certain density that we are asking. And like Chad mentioned, in Tempe, that major general plan amendments are heard in October once a year. The diagram to the right is basically how it emanates all the way from general plan to infrastructure plans, other high-level plans, and implementation plan like the Urban Core Master Plan, which is advisory, and then finally to the core that we go to. This is a boundary that you have seen many times, 6.15 square miles, 202, 101, Hardy, and the rail lines. I will start with the updated TOD. This is the map of the existing TOD boundary. This will remain in the book. This will remain in effect. The new Urban Code District, which will be the opt-in district that I just spoke about, will have a lot of interesting elements and sections to improve and to promote the quality of life and to promote pedestrian orientation development and also sustainability. It will be a new section in the Zoning and Development Code. It has 7 different zones, UC1 to UC7. We'll describe a little more detail as we go forward. It refines the list of permitted uses in each one of the districts. So each one of the districts become pretty self-sufficient. A lot of areas to activate the ground floor and certain retail and mixed use standards. And then it has kind of what they call a form-based standard that you should be able to see what kind of development will come if the zoning is adopted. So it's not only the traditional dimension, it also gives you a visual picture of how they're going to look like. So examples of that are the frontage standards, the facade, civic space standards, or the gathering spaces. Those are delineated a lot more in detail. Also has a tip reduction program, and most importantly, it will also have a bonus program that will be available, and we'll go into a little more detail into that also. That's in a separate track. It will go through a public hearing process and finally come to you as a text amendment, but that will be available in the Urban Code District. The design and frontage standards, just some example. This document is going to be much more user-friendly. It will have a lot more images. It actually, if people opt in, it will provide a much more higher quality of design and quality of life for people who opt in. For example, it will have very specific sidewalk standards, parking standards on if you build it, it has to be adaptable, much more parking for bicycle and regulations and standards for large blocks. If people actually assemble a lot more than 450 feet in length, there should be connectivity that is required. Lots of elements of sustainable development and tree reduction plan to which Robert Abbis will speak a little later on. Some of the images on the right are example of what is embedded in the book. It's about 50-page long document. Here is a map of the Urban Core District zones, the 7 zones we talked about, all the way from the highest intensity of 160 feet to the lowest intensity next to the residential areas, which is 40 feet. It's a little difficult to read, but the UC1 to UC7 is delineated on the map.
I'm so sorry. Could we go back a slide? Sorry, Mr.
Yes.
So the parking structures, can you explain that again? Above 25% of maximum parking future-proof. Can you just go into that more?
Okay, so the Urban Core District, the parking standards are going to be 2 categories. The minimum is going to be lesser than what we usually have. Actually, it's going to be something like 85% of what the city center allows, because we do want to discourage parking and encourage bicycle and other things. But people will also have to have an opportunity to go to the maximum. That is there's a maximum and minimum. Both of them are kind of delineated in the book. And if people want to go beyond the maximum, they can go up to 125% of the maximum if they provide certain amenities. If they do either underground parking or parking structure that is future adaptable, higher ceiling heights, flat floors, so that it could be used once the car situation changes later on. Many other cities are doing this kind of thing in places like Singapore and Hong Kong, even in the US. So those are some of the examples.
Wouldn't we want to give a requirement for flat structures so we could have conversion once the AV world is upon us or we have less need for parking?
If I understood you, if there is like less demand for parking.
Well, yeah, it seems like a lot
Convertibility?
of the developments we've been looking at, the parking structures have been, they're not curved, slanted, they're flat, so they can allow for future use and evolution of that space. If there's a need in the future for less parking.
So just to clarify, this is what we're intending to do because we're setting a new standard of a minimum and then a new maximum.
Right.
So typically we haven't required maximum parking requirements. It was required when we had surface parking, but the new maximum is a threshold to say, have parking no more than this and no less than this. If they want to exceed it, that's when we require the future proofing requirements of the parking structures. We are getting some feedback that there's some costs to that. So we're getting feedback on what those costs are, but we think it's an important element to evaluate and have in the code as part of this effort.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just my personal opinion, but it seems like on the one hand, we're trying to reduce parking. Maybe the standard is 85% of what we currently have, but then we're also going to possibly allow a parking structure to be above 125% of the maximum, that we're not really encouraging less parking in the city.
I correct myself. The 125% is the 125% of the maximum parking that's allowed, not beyond that.
Right.
And actually, even the 125%, I did not bring a slide, but we'll give you some numbers. I think we communicated with you on that one. Even if you take the maximum, or even if you take the 125% of the maximum that we are proposing on the urban core district, it is way less than the general level of parking that we allow people. So because we are trying to drastically reduce the amount of parking, we do want to give a little bit of flexibility for people if they need it for business and other reasons. But it's still way less than what the normal parking is.
Councilmember Erdano Savage.
I mean, I like flexibility. I think that's really important to have. I mean, I understand the want to reduce parking, but I still think, you know, we live in Arizona. We're not back east. We're not Manhattan. So I want to make sure that we have the diversity and the ability for people that do want to have a car, especially like if it's an office space or if it's somebody that's a residential that wants to live there. So, but I want to know that 125, and if somebody gets to the 125, is that still less than what we allow now in the current TOD? Or is it about the same?
It depends on the type of zoning. Compared to some of the zoning that we have, it is less than what we allow right now. But if you take the city center, it would be somewhat equivalent because we have taken the standards here, something like 85% of what the city center allows. So in
So it kind of
general,
gets us back to about where we are with the 125.
it also changes on the zone. It would be in average, it will be way less
More in the center.
than the average zoning that we have.
Okay, yeah. No,
There's some calculation that we can
no,
go
I
over.
understand.
We can share the council with some numbers, scenarios, so that you can kind of look at the range and
Right.
spectrum of the parking.
Well, and I think we had that conversation too, and I think one of the things would be really helpful is to kind of see how some of the other developments are currently being parked, right? If they're significantly underparked, if they're overparked. I mean, to me, that's something that we need to take into consideration for sure.
Exactly. And also the time for transition, because things may not happen all of a sudden. That's why there is that range in the beginning. And also when the car ownership or the car drivership reduces, those buildings would not just be like sitting down with the ramps, they will be actually be convertible.
Well, and lastly, I just want to say I appreciate, Ryan, you taking the time to understand the expense to our developers, what that costs in regards to parking, because I think, you know, we want to continue to be business friendly. So I just hope that we get that information back so we can make a really solid decision on that.
Vice Mayor.
Just to make a follow-up point, I know developers have reduced costs if there's reduced parking requirements, and I think there's that that little incentive. And just to point out, this is the TOD, and that it is a focus of our multimodal transport. So we're not talking about Tempe as has been, but how we're going to be in the future, and that's why we need to reduce the number of cars in our city, and it's such an important part of this plan, or so I would think.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks.
Okay, so that's the map again. The 7 different districts, different levels of intensity. The closer that you go to single family areas, the closer that you go to neighborhood, the height drastically decreases all the way to 40. And the UC5, actually, we started with 60 feet, but there was a lot of feedback from people that let's make it around 55, so we reduced it to 55. Here's a table just to make it easy, the height in feet all the way from UC1 to UC7. As you'll see in the urban core District 1, which is downtown, there is also a minimum height, and the minimum height is being proposed to get a certain type of construction type so that there's a flexibility in getting a better aesthetic and better design. Otherwise, it's all max, people can build below. And then the density, there's noise standards in UC1 and UC2, but it really goes down and tapers down by the time you go next to the single family residences.
Before we move on that one, I really appreciate this slide because it really puts a lot of stuff in perspective. But one of the things, and I understand the desire to create a, density in areas that's outlined in the UC1, but I believe you do have the right idea of keeping the density in the location that it's on the previous slide in the map, with maybe some caveats. But I do have some reservations with the maximum height of the UC1 right off the bat at 160. And I've talked to Chad and Ryan about this because, right now in the TOD, it's 50 to 100. And we're saying we want it to 160, which basically is about 15 stories, 15 stories, without any incentive to do anything that we would like to see from the council and some of the strategies that we have. So I think it's a pretty big drastic change. And I understand that developments are being asked to do more. The result we're asking them to look at green building, some sustainability options, creating public spaces. But these elements that our community council have voiced priority on, if right off the bat we give them that much, I would like to hear my colleagues on this because I'm not sure what the right height is, but I would tell you that if we're really looking to incentivize, if we're looking at our housing strategy for affordable housing, workforce housing, we need to make sure that you don't want to give them right off the bat, 160 feet right off the bat, like maybe 120 feet. And then for them to go to the urban core master plan model to get bonuses, we're going to be looking at affordable housing. We're going to be looking at workforce housing. We're going to be looking at more sustainability options. It's an incentive for us based on the project that's coming forward. I just have a little reservation, right? I'm not saying they can't do it because they come to us anyways, but right off the bat, just to have where's the incentive for us to get some of the priorities that we've been asking for to get that buy-in? And I wanted to have my colleagues on that. Randy?
I'm going to have to respectfully disagree with you, Mayor, on that. We have to add, I believe the number is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, 14,000 more housing units to keep up with growth demand. And that's obviously the fact that we're behind that goal today is obviously creating stress on our housing market. So we currently have in our downtown core 25-story buildings. So to say, look, you can start out with 15, but then we have incentives to go even higher, to go up to 25 if provide affordable housing or public amenities. Me and Chad and Ryan talked about, kind of prioritizing affordable housing in that equation as far as, what gets you what as far as height goes. Regardless of that, I think we need to add as much housing as we possibly can in that red area. That's not a lot of space. We don't have, we don't have a lot of room to grow except for up. And as the globe continues to heat up, and as people continue to move to Tempe, we're going to have to get denser. And I think the only opportunity for us to do that is to get this right. So, obviously we're going to get denser, but to do it in a way that's going to meet our goals as far as adding the amount of housing units that we're going to need to keep up with demand. So I actually I read an interesting article, which I had Elizabeth send to all of us, and it talks about how all additional housing, including market rate, takes pressure off the affordable housing market. So that's kind of the attitude that I'm trying to take here, is the more that we can put into the downtown urban core, the better it will be for the city as a whole. So that's just my thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, and Councilman Keating, I agree. I hear your point, but I'm saying I think we're trying to get to the same solution, just have a different way of getting there, because right now someone could build up to 15 stories without opting in, and then we actually don't get anything out of it in terms of affordability or sustainability. But if you have an option to right off the bat, have it at maybe a little bit lower level, you still have your 10, 11 stories. But if you really want, like you're saying, that they're going to have 20 stories and plus like some of the stuff that's coming before the council, this is an opportunity to really get something in return for affordable housing and for workforce housing that's part of our overall housing strategy goal. I think by making it completely off the back, just waiving enough of that, because they're going to come to us anyways, I think it's a better opportunity to get them to opt in. That's my only.
I understand that. And to that point, Mayor, I just want to say, I guess where we do want to see the same thing happen, we agree on that. I think where we disagree is, I think we do get something off of a building that's inherently taller and inherently more dense than I don't think that's us getting nothing. I think that's us getting more housing units for the urban core. And, we often approve these very tall buildings. So if we can say, look, you got 15 stories and that's that, and that's a benefit to the city at this point due to the fact that we have to add so many new housing units. But you want to go to 25 and you want to make 10 stories of affordable units on top of that, that's just value added in my opinion.
Councilman Navarro and Vice Mayor Cubey.
Yeah, and I think trying to get to the point where you're at, they're in the downtown area. This is, and thinking about it, it is an area that we don't have a lot of room for development. I mean, we're getting tight and tight as it is. And the room that we do have for development, or the potential room that we have for development, I agree. I want to incentivize developers to come in. I want to incentivize people to know what our restrictions are and know what the lay of the land is. But at the same time, just in that downtown area, I do kind of agree that I want the council to have some sort of say, especially when it comes to design, especially when it comes to certain looks, feels, or what the use is going to be, to have a little more knowledge in it instead of it just going through a process and we'll never hear about it. I think it's strategic for us just to have some sort of say in the game, but not to overburden the process at the same time. And I'm just talking about that downtown area as we develop, because we're very short out of room.
Vice Mayor Cubey and Councilman Arredondo Savage.
We've had some discussions, you and I, Ryan and Chad, about this issue, and I'm really sensitive to what the mayor is saying, because from my understanding, the TOD, or the new urban code as it's described, there is some upzoning involved. There's not upzoning with the urban core master plan. That's all incentive based. But there's an initial baseline of upzoning that comes with the urban code. And can you give the answer to that you gave to me the other day about why you felt you had to sort of give away a little bit? And from my perspective, and the mayor's perspective, it's like, maybe we should be getting a little bit more back. But you seem to think that is a requirement to really make this code work. Can you explain that position?
Certainly. The basis for the numbers are when they came in. We've got varying base zoning district heights in the downtown right now. So about half of the downtown is covered with the transportation overlay district that exists today. The underlying CC zoning allows 50-foot maximum height. In the areas where you have station area requirements for the TOD, you can build within 75 to 100 feet in height. So that's a threshold right now that potentially would yield a project similar to like the Hanover project, which is 85 feet. The reason for wanting to establish a minimum height is to get 90 feet or above to get that type 1A construction type, but then within a range flexible to say within 9 to 12 or 13 stories, you could do a product within that specific range, and then be able to have them to opt into the zoning district, because without them opting into it, we've got to make sure that we can have the standards that they establish as well as wanting to opt into it. And then we can find whatever that sweet spot is, whether the height's lower than 160 or 130, and then have them to go through a council process to get anything higher than that. And that would have to come with incentives.
So yeah, my concern, and I expressed this the other day, and I mean, I understand this, first of all, this is not a black and white issue. There's a lot of nuance here, and the goal is to have a city that is planned and makes sense, and that is, a comfortable city for all levels of income. My concern is that these buildings are going to be there for a long time, 40, 50 years, and we're heading towards a time frame, thank you for pointing that out, where we are in a bit of a climate crisis, climate emergency, with temperatures getting hotter and hotter. And if we don't, for instance, require green building codes, which we have yet to develop, we've lost that bite at the apple. I understand that maybe affordable housing really isn't necessarily going to happen right on Mill. It could happen somewhere else, though, if there's contributions to the housing fund. But then I also think about the historic preservation aspect, like the higher we build, and we want to encourage height in the places where we want to encourage height, but height causes a lot more disruption to the soil. There could be more impacts on archaeological remains that are there. There's it's complicated, there's issues. So I'm still not entirely comfortable with that sort of early giveaway. And I want to really understand why that's a necessity for the developers to want to build greater height, because greater height in itself or greater density is going to bring them more profit. So I'm still kind of, I'm not sold on this, but I'm still open-minded about, and I want to hear more about it.
Yeah,
Maybe not now, but.
Majority of
Now's
the
the time to
projects
do
that have been coming in, like the Westin Hotel, the Collective, these projects all have heights higher than what we're proposing within the UC1 district standard. So those projects would have to go through a process that would have to be authorized by City Council. And the one example of a project that would fit this height range would be the Whole Foods, the local project, which is 10 stories in height. So we can bring those comparisons for you all to look at and evaluate and consider what is the appropriate height moving forward.
Councilman Arredondo Savage?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Just a couple things. First and foremost, Brian, thank you for taking the time to explain, I think, the quality construction, and something that we've really been talking about is type 1, because I think people will see in the downtown area and just across Tempe and across, the state, type 1 construction is definitely a much more desirable construction that lasts a lot longer. It looks usually a lot nicer. So I certainly do support and understand that 90 feet. I really get that. I'm super concerned, and I guess this is kind of maybe a legal question too, is I don't want to say we give it away at 160, but if we go to 160 and we decide this is not the right idea and we blew it, can we take it back? Because I think I don't think with 207 we can do that.
Right.
So part of me says, I have a tendency to lean towards agreeing with the mayor and the vice mayor in regards to giving away a little bit to make up for the minimum, because I really want that minimum and that quality of design. I mean, that quality construction. So maybe to like a 125 number, but I think if we give it to 160 and then we want to take it back, we can. I think we are going to be forced to keep the 160 and not be able to take that back. But if we think of the 125 or whatever number we come up with that's in between, and we say, hey, obviously in 2 years it's not working, maybe we do need to increase the height, then we'll have the ability to do that. But I just don't think that, giving it away so soon with something so new is the right way for us to go. But I can certainly look for a happy medium in that. And I do like the idea of them working to help us address our priorities, whichever one they so choose. I think that's good. So I think that they need to earn it if it's going to be above that. And I agree with Joel and Councilmember Navarro in regards to the council, especially in the downtown area with all that height and density. There's got to be a really solid role for the council within that process, because the last thing I want to see happen is we create a lot of density, a lot of height, great quality buildings, but it becomes a student housing mecca. I don't want that to happen. I believe in diversity. I know we're going to have students downtown, and I'm fine with that. That's great. But I think it needs to be a variety and a great mix, and have some viability for people that really want to live down there, whether they're empty nesters, grad students, whatever they may be. But I don't want it to be, taken over so much one side or the other. So I think that's going to be really important of what that process looks like and what happens behind those walls. Thank you, Mayor.
Mayor, that's the type of feedback we would like if we can now or at the end get consensus around the notion of whether that 160, for instance, needs to come down to some extent. That's something we can work on, and obviously we don't have to pick a number. We can continue to work with you on it, but that's good direction.
Right, because instead of giving it right off the bat, because we could always increase it. And when they opt in, that's where the bonuses come in with certain types of incentives, whether it's was it the trip reduction plans that we're looking at. And I know back in 2017, we had a 27.3% of the residents that did not drive alone to commute to work. And that's some of the incentives that we're offering. I mean, look at, for example, what happened with State Farm. Look at the stuff that we worked with them on Rio Salado. So if we could work with, for trip reduction plans, if we can work with opportunities that where the council actually has a say in some of the types of developments that's going to be coming forward to us in the urban core, I think that speaks volumes. If our residents want us to have that, I think you look at the type of incentives, which I think we should be looking at, whether it's sustainability, public amenities, historic preservation, as well as affordable and workforce housing. I think that's something that's the policy goals that we have all established as a council. And those are some of the incentive priorities that is part of this process. And we can always increase it when we have that chance, but once you increase it, if we go back, we can't. So that's my only caution there. And I think, we're trying to find what is the right height for that. But I also think it's important, as some of my colleagues have said, that it's important that we have a say in some of the stuff that's being built, and we want the type A type construction, and we're seeing it. But having those amenities or those incentives, if you will, for the bonuses, that helps them opt in to get what we want as for our priorities. Vice Mayor?
So, not to add complexity to the discussion, but it's there. I asked you the question about Monty's because I think development, and we all probably agree, is contextual, and you really want to look at context in a given development. And I thought if this council is sort of giving away its power, would the case of Monty's resulted in a property that wasn't preserved and protected as well as we've been able to protect and preserve La Casa Vieja and Hayden House? And you had a really intriguing answer that indeed a case like that would come to council. That wouldn't be just done by right. So can you explain that? Explain the Monty's development and how that would come under this new rubric.
Well, certainly. So we had the new urban code adopted, and the result of the Monty's or the Hayden House, and that effort took a collaborative effort with the developer to come up with establish incentives, development agreement, and basically give back into the city, which was ownership of the Hayden House, the historic Hayden House, where now the city of Tempe owns that property. And as a result, in return, they received authorization from a 220-foot tall office building, which sits now will be sitting under construction in the future to the west of that property area there. So we've preserved the historic elements of that building while in return granting the heights and densities that's being contemplated on the other portions of the property that are not affecting the Hayden.
But under the urban code, but to clarify, I realize all that.
Yeah. And
Would
so that process
same
required,
scenario have transpired under the urban code?
No, it would not. It would still require city council's authorization, and maybe we'd have more of a clear established parameter by which what those incentive guidelines are to be eligible to have council authorize those type of increases.
Councilman Navarro?
Just with going through the process with the development community, I know we talked about the height of 125, 160 or whatever like that. For the developers, any input on the height of what's the incentive? If we said 125, 130, 140, I don't know. Any input on that?
We've not had this amount of input on the general scope. We've had project specific. I have this slot and I would like this slot to go higher. Most of those are in the much shorter areas though. We do have one representative near University and Rural that's asking for downtown-ish heights. They have not, I've not heard anything about the 160 being too tall or too short. And I think obviously most of them are looking towards that urban core height, knowing that there's an option to get there with a, similar to the PAD process, but with more prescribed bonus provisions that we're trying to promote. So.
Excuse me, can I ask? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Well, just to follow up, we have a chance though. We have other meetings coming up to possibly get some input from developers just in general on a guidance of height. So we do have that.
We have time. We can go seek it. We can call folks up and specifically request input. If you all give us some direction to consider some certain option, we can certainly send that option out and see if folks prefer the existing one or the new one that you propose. So yeah, we will do as much outreach as necessary.
Yeah, I would like to get some of that information.
Right. Vice Mayor?
You mentioned University and Rural. Is that the southeast corner?
No, northeast.
No, yeah, north.
East, okay.
Well, actually, potentially both. So
Yeah.
Because that area is the site of many archaeological remains in the southeast corner of a quarter of a platform mound under that giant bit of ugly asphalt. So that goes to my point about historic preservation and archaeological properties that are yet to be discovered that we need to protect by all of these changes. Thank you.
Anybody else have any comments? You're gonna.
And Mayor, if I may just-
Yeah, Randy?
Yeah, obviously I'm in the minority. I'm not gonna fall on my sword on this one, but I just want to reiterate that once a building is built, we can't add height, and this is going to be high quality construction, and it's going to be there for 50, 70 years, and we don't have that much space. So I think anytime we are building as many units in a little amount of space as possible, we're hurting ourselves in the long term.
Councilmember Chin.
So to clarify, I think the understanding is don't go to 160 yet. I think that's what we want to do is we want to take a deeper dive, take a closer look, however you want to say it, at those exceptions above, and I don't know what the number is currently, but we'd like it to be under 160 for now. And to Councilmember Keating's point, I don't think it's a hard no to 160. It's not yet, is my understanding.
I'm feeling a hard no.
Yeah.
I'd
rather have
I don't
it-
know if it's hard.
I'm kind of feeling a hard no, but I'm open. But I'm open.
Because
The feedback and
the whole point of this is we want people, we're creating a sense of density in an urban environment. But in return, we would like to have something come back to us, our community, in the form of the priorities that we've established as a council. And I think, and we're not saying you can't go higher than that, because obviously we're looking at doing that. This is just the baseline with the subzones that it's here, but it doesn't mean that you can't go hard based on the type of development, the quality of the type of development, what the material is gonna be made out of, and so forth. So I think that gives us more leverage as a council to get the type of developments that we really seek in the downtown area, and working with the private sector and working with potential, developers coming into the urban core, because it all goes together like that. And we're not saying you can't build a 20-story building unless it all depends if you're doing X, Y, and Z, that the priorities that the council establish. And I think that gives us some buy-in with our residents and with our community to really get the type of community makeup that we're looking for. Yes, Councilmember Adams.
We will have the ability to make the decisions, right, on
Yeah.
the buildings
That's
down the road. So it'll be on a case-by-case basis, correct?
Right,
And I
now-
would like to see the developers also give us their thoughts regarding the height.
Though you could go to 160, let's say it's 8 to 15 stories, it could be wholly student housing, and we can't have a say in it.
I'd like to hear some input to what they have to say. I'm not saying that it's going to define our decision.
No.
I still think that it's
No,
smart.
absolutely.
Mayor,
Yes,
really quick.
Councilmember Keating.
To that student housing point really quickly, Councilmember Arredondo Savage and I got an earful about student housing last Monday, and
We did.
I just want to point out that students need housing as well. And that
Absolutely.
also creates a lot of pressure, artificial pressure on our affordable housing market. The lack of student housing, that is.
One
That's
more
the
thing.
point. Vice Mayor, then Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
I think you're hearing, I think you're hearing from me and from Mr. Mayor, but that we need to think about attaching incentives to all the urban code upzoned areas, as well as in the urban core master plan, where that's all optional as well. But I want to see a more fully delineated argument about why we can't have incentives attached to the upzoning in the urban code.
Councilmember Arredondo Savage.
Thank you, Mayor. I just really want to be clear on my perspective and being able to move forward, right, in regards to my thought process. I certainly understand the need for the minimum 90 feet, and I think we all had that conversation in regards to quality construction and that's what we want in the downtown area. At least that's what I would like to see. I don't know what that magic number is. I know I'm not comfortable with the 160. I think that's a really big giveaway. In the sense of not giving anything back or not addressing our priorities. So I'm not going to tell you what I think that magic number is until we actually hear back and get some feedback from developers. I think that would be really, really important. But I do agree with the Vice Mayor and the Mayor that, I want to make sure that we are addressing the priorities. I think that we promised our residents. And if we are giving away something, then I think that needs to be a part of that discussion. So I don't know what the magic answer is, but I think if we get some feedback from the developers, hear what the DRC has to say, and some of their feedback, I think it'll really help us create something that's super comprehensive and that we can live with for many years to come, because we want to get it right. I think Councilmember Keating said that at the very beginning. It's really important that we get this right and take our time and get all the feedback that we can to make sure it's a solid, comprehensive plan moving forward. So, thank you, Mayor.
May I have a question? Yes. So we have a goal of how many units that we need to hit by 2040 to stay up with growth in the housing market. Did you consider that number in this proposal? Is there a way for us, is this like we're bare minimally hitting that goal, or is there wiggle room there if we somehow took away units from that, which we may do? It sounds like, is there a way for us to still be on pace to be on track to hit that housing goal?
Councilmember Keating, the consultants gave us some initial ballpark numbers. If you build out with these total TOD heights, that alone is not going to match the growth that will be required by 2040. Something like 3.5 million square feet of offices, 14,000 dwelling units, and 45,000 additional population. But this was just an approximation. The urban core master plan if you build out on that kind of height, which is of course not given, it's only advisory, people apply, that would accommodate the growth and maybe some more. So that was their initial estimate, because you have to make so many assumptions, what kind of mixed use people will build, because even if you give a height, there will be some residences, some offices and so on. So they had some approximate numbers that they played with, looking at what the Novus was building, something like total of 8 million square feet, and then what they did. But we can definitely go back, look at maybe a different base, like Chad and Ryan was saying, discuss it, and then maybe build a little more benefit to the city through bonuses, because that's something that I was going to talk a little later. We have a separate track. So those things we can finagle those numbers, and we can give you some input on what is likely. But the UCD alone, even if it is completely built out with this kind of height, will not absorb the total growth that is anticipated.
Thank you.
Councilmember Adams?
Yes, I have a question about what was DRC's input on the height?
The DRC basically approved the draft the way it is, with many things that is being, like people are giving comments and contemplated. So it's not hard, but a working draft they approved.
We didn't get any specific comments to the heights in downtown, but we can certainly follow up with them and ask them about that study session.
But I think we got a really good guidance that there could be bonusable and incentive elements to still reach the same height, those kind of things. So we'll discuss that and figure it out. Okay, so that's the map, that's the table. And we will now go to the urban core master plan, which is once again to differentiate. Once we have the UCD adopted, it will be part of the code, and when people opt in, their property will be rezoned by signing a paper. So they will have a new zoning district. Urban core master plan obviously doesn't change any of those zoning, everything remains the same, but it delineates the areas where the growth has to go, could be accommodated. And we looked at these slides before, and looks like some of you remember some of these numbers, but on a higher level, this is the kind of projection for 2040 that the consultants did, based on the MAC projection, based on the census projection, and based on some of the market data. Just to highlight, there's going to be a population growth of approximately another 45,000. This is only for the urban core. And then approximately 14,000 new housing units. And then there are assumptions on what kind of office, whether it is base or accelerated, and retail. Altogether, you'll see that amounts to more than 3.5 or 4 million square feet. And the chart on the right, because when we go to public hearing, there are many people who tell us, hey, we don't want anything to grow. We don't want to change anything. We're fine the way that we are. And we basically just have to see that we've been growing. Even since 1980, we've almost doubled the population. So there is a population growth of anywhere between 1.5 to 2% in Tempe, and it continues to grow. And by 2040, there will be another 50,000 people or something like that. And in order to accommodate that, that is what drove the idea of some of these numbers that the consultants had to begin to work, both on the TOD, the urban core district, and also in the urban core master plan. So you talked about how many meetings we had, because some people, again, they come at the last moment. We appreciate all the inputs, but we also want to communicate it properly that we've been talking to people, we've been going to the people, we've been listening, and these are all based on that, and we'll continue to listen and get all the input all the way to the end. But we have been doing that. That's a visual of some of the meetings, some of the high meetings that we had. In addition to that, we also had many other meetings. Some images of some of the meetings and what we heard, and those were the basis for building some of the heights and the locations. On people gave us some ideas on where they want the growth locations, basically downtown, intersection, corridor, what kind of connectivity they are looking at, the development character that they're looking at. Again, many people do say parking less is better, although there are some groups of people, they want more parking. I think it's for banking and financing requirements, so it's also a balancing act. But in transit, obviously, people are okay with less parking. And then sustainability has been one of the central themes, both on the UCD and also in the urban core master plan. A lot of guidelines and strategies for sustainability. Some of the real peak on that 100-page document that you saw on the Urban Core Master Plan, just a few points. It talks about urban design. There are lots of design guidelines, the development patterns, or how to do the public realm on pedestrian connection in the street, and a lot of pages on sustainability. In addition to that, there are strategies for each one of those 4 different locations within the Urban Core Master Plan, the East Apache, West Apache, downtown, and the terrace area. So each one of them also have the strategies on what is the vision of the city, what kind of development that we look, so that when people look at the plan, they can see this is what the city is actually looking at, and we all will have a shared vision for the planning. It's also rich with images and pictures on how we want those kind of looks. And the incentives, so I want to spend maybe a minute on this one. This is what we talked about. Yes, please.
You might want to hold the microphone. Hold it.
Oh.
There's a big echo.
Oh, okay. Okay, so
That's very good.
is it better now or is it too loud?
That's too loud.
Okay,
We're trying.
Is this fine now? Test? Okay. I'll try from here. The incentives, we have a consultant, a small amount of money. We have a consultants that have begun to work on the incentives and the bonus program. And we did have one stakeholder meetings because we do want to do it right. We want to do it in a separate track. We will do it as a text amendment to the code. We looked at some of the peer cities. They also have a similar type of situation. You can have a part of the code where the incentives and bonuses are well defined, but very clear metrics on what you get for giving what, very black and white, very little discretion. And the areas where the incentives will apply, for example, the UCD and the Urban Core Master Plan, this could be kind of decoupled from that perspective. The incentives that we are looking at right now is on the 4 areas, like the mayor was saying. Affordable and workforce housing bonus is one component. Sustainability bonus is another one. Public improvements and amenities is the third one. And historic preservation for the sites which are eligible for the historic preservation incentives will be 4-1. And we're also looking at how some of the peer cities are working on the incentives. And the consultants have studied a little bit on how Scottsdale, Phoenix, City of Mesa, and the City of Maricopa are working, what kind of incentive and bonus program that they have. So this is under development. It is on a separate track. We will come to you, we'll go to the public, we'll come to DRC, it will be advertised, and we just want to do that very right. So the consultants are going to give us some kind of feel of what you have to give to get certain things, so still becomes attractive that people voluntarily opt in into the bonus program, but it's also not a giveaway to the developers. So that's the balance that we're trying to hit. And this will be available both for the Urban Core Master Plan and also the Urban Code District. Just a visual image of how that might work. This is just a bubble type of diagram on the right side. So you have a base zoning that you see on any property, maybe R3 or R4 or CSS, that gives you certain height by right. And then the Urban Code District, once people opt in and sign the paper and their property is rezoned to that particular district, will get that second line, the second dotted line from the bottom is the height that they get. And then on top of that, those hatches that you see would be the Urban Code District and bonus. So that's something that by providing certain amount of benefits and the public benefit in terms of the affordable housing, historic preservation, and so on, they will get additional density and bonus. And we've also getting some feedback from other cities that sometimes the developers will just take the low-hanging fruits. So we might be crafting the bonus in such a way that we get the historic preservation, of course, is unique because it only applies to the historic preservation site, and then they have to do that first. The rest of them, they can only attempt after they provide the historic preservation bonus. But the other things, we'll work with the consultants and we'll come back to you. Might be a mix of the things so that it's not only the low-hanging fruit, but we also get housing and amenities in addition to that. And the urban core master plan, of course, because it's advisory and the areas are delineated for heights, when people want to come for that height, they will have to rezone, they will have to come through a PAD, or they will have to come through a development agreement or some other form of process, which comes all the way to the council. So it's not by right. And that is where a lot more flexibility of the bonus and all those development guidelines and design guidelines we spoke about will apply. The 135 design guidelines that we spoke about in books will be applicable depending on the sites where people apply for those sites. So this is the urban core master plan, height are on the top. So based on all the discussion that we did, this is a different layer of the heights. The UCD is, if once people opt in, that's by right, and that's a lower height compared to the urban core master plan height. This is the height that actually begins to accommodate that final growth. So we do want eventually, if this is adopted by the council, we would want people to seek these heights because that is what will take care of all these additional housing units and intensities and densities. And these locations are very carefully selected. It's on the downtown, you get more height. On the terrace, also another height that is 250 feet plus. And then as you go in Apache on the intersections, it is high, but as you transition towards the residential area, the height really goes down. And the areas have been selected by the consultants and the staff by looking at the underlying zoning, looking at the distance from the single family homes in the neighborhoods, looking at the capacity of the infrastructure. Many of them are on transit line from transportation. So this will be, I think, a good area and good location that we are proposing that the height, the recommended height people can apply for and meet all these requirements that we just talked about, both in terms of the bonus and also the design guidelines. Robert, do you want to very quickly speak on these two slides?
Thank you. Robert Yavis, Transportation, Engineering and Transportation Department. I work in transportation. Anyway, how do we serve all these new developments? We need to move people instead of moving cars. What are our strategies? One is we're putting all the developments in areas where we could serve them. Transit service is key to moving people. What are other strategies? Accessible land uses. We want mixed use so that if somebody needs to buy milk, they don't have to drive someplace. They can just go downstairs, go to a local grocery store and walk there. What other options do we have? Well, we need to build facilities that would promote walking, cycling, high quality public transit, ride sharing, et cetera, et cetera. We also have to convert to mood shift. We need to move people from single occupancy to higher occupancy vehicles. We need to promote HOV lanes, and we need to do trip reduction strategies. When I say trip reduction strategies, there's some confusion on what it is. What essentially it is we need to reduce, we need to reduce the number of cars that are traveling to where the city center is or to where the urban core is. We need to accommodate growth and development under the UCD and general plan while reducing peak period automobile commute trips. So we need to switch the modes. One of the strategies that we've looked at is to require trip reduction as part of the as part of any development process, so that if somebody wants to come and apply for development, we need to make sure that one of the strategies they do to reduce the number of trips that are getting to their development is no SOVs or single occupancy vehicles. Right now, the city has transportation, what's it called? Sorry. We have a system where if you have 75 to 149 peak trips, you're required to do a traffic impact assessment. As part of this process, we would like to include TDM strategies, demand management strategies, in reducing this volume of cars that are coming to each development. We have two tiers, 10% for the 75 to 149. The other reduction is if it's 150 or more, we need to have 20% of your peak hour trips
So,
reduced.
Robert, just so I understand, we all know that traffic's not going to go away. In fact, it's probably the highest it's been, not just here, all across the state and the country. But what I like to think of it, the flexibility of the urban code, is that by opting in, we're helping them direct a trip reduction plan to try to get cars off. And I mentioned earlier in my opening comments that in 2017, I believe we have seen a 27.3% of our residents did not drive alone or commute to work. With that being said, we're not eliminating the use of a vehicle, but we're also trying to how they get to work. But we want them to look at the trip reductions to reduce the single occupancy vehicles, as you referred to SOC. But can you tell me, or the council, where has this happened in other parts of the city or the valley, for that matter, on reduction plans? Have they worked in other cities?
Not in the state of Arizona. It's a heresy to be asking people to drive less in the state of Arizona. But in California, it's required. The first point of, if you're applying for any development in California, you're required to do a mitigation measure. One of them is trip reduction. That's the first thing. We've
seen some percent, which is a good thing, but I think that's what the flexibility of this, by opting into the code, by going more dense, we would look for that strategy.
Yes, we would require them if they're opting
Ms.
in.
Chin?
I have a follow-up question, and forgive me if this already exists, but do we have any data from a citywide traffic study?
On what? I'm sorry. Volumes, traffic volumes?
Have we ever done a citywide traffic study?
Yes.
So we have data available to reference?
Yes, we have data available. We have data. I've asked MAG to provide us data for where the urban core is. And if you want, I can show them later. Not today, but some other time. I'm sorry.
Vice Mayor?
And most recently with ASU, a small area transportation study that was done of a more intensive area. I don't know if it covers the entire urban core, but there was a visionary sort of document as well created. We're going to have a new Prop 500 and go after larger transportation projects. So it's meant to kind of inform that process in a very, very early stage.
Yeah, there was a presentation actually that was done by Shelley about a year and a half ago, was it? On what the big ticket items should be that we should be looking at to make sure that our system works better, I guess. And the other strategy is creating a transportation management association. Anybody knows what that is? It's actually a non-government entity. And what it does is it helps those businesses that are doing demand management, travel demand management. What they do is not to police things, but actually help them implement things. For example, there's reporting requirements for the Maricopa Trip Reduction Ordinance. They can help them prepare those. It also helps them buy things like bulk transit passes so that they can get them at a cheaper rate than what an individual company could. They could provide support for matching ride shares, that kind of stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Robert. So basically, both on the urban core district, the trip reduction plan is one of the sections in the urban code district. So if people opt in, they will actually have to do it if they meet that requirement. And the other connectivity diagram was one of the bases in terms of infrastructure and mobility to do the urban core master plan height also. These are all connected from that perspective. Okay, so related, related to both of these requests, the staff has put an application for the general plan amendment application to support, basically to support the visions that are both in the urban core district, which is much more mixed use, a little more intensity. And if people do apply for the urban core master plan height, then they need a lot more density, and also the type of use is different. So the application has three different elements. One is the increased amount of mixed use type of land use, and then the increased density in some locations. And then because of the Smith Hub, which is part of the urban core master plan, we also have a text amendment called mixed use / industrial that will be available for that area and also the Makers District in Broadway. This is the current projected land use of General Plan 2014, just for your visual. And then the proposed 2040 projected land use, those purple lines, they are basically, let me see if I can use this. Mixed use. Okay, I was trying. Okay, so those are the areas where things have changed. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Really sorry. Those are the areas that the things have changed and mostly mixed use. And as you see, the mixed use compared to the previous diagram is slightly more to accommodate the transit, the UCD, and also the urban core master plan. And this is the Smith area hub. That is the mixed use / industrial land use that we're proposing as a new use. The next slide is the projected residential density as it stands right now. And the changes that we're proposing are within that green lines, between those green boundaries. Those are the areas where the density changes are being proposed. Otherwise, it all remains the same. And those will basically accommodate and support the vision that we have put forward, both in the urban core district, slightly more height and slightly more density, and also in the urban core master plan if people come to make an application. Because right now, when people come for a higher density and higher height, they also ask for a general plan amendment. So this will kind of make the room and support that future vision. The adoption process, Chad already talked about it, but just to reiterate, the adoption of the major general plan happens only in October. This is why we have timed all this schedule to culminate in October. And the adoption of the urban core master plan will happen by resolution if the council so chooses. And the adoption of the urban core district will be by ordinance if the council so chooses. We'll come to you on September 26th and also on October 17th for the second hearing. Questions?
Anybody else have any other questions? Yes, Vice Mayor Cubey.
So yeah, I have some questions generally about historic preservation. And I know the incentive bonus program is yet to be fully fleshed out and consultants are working on that. But I just want to ensure that there's language throughout the documents about historic preservation, and there's lots of general language. But it's my concern, I think a lot of citizens' concern, certainly the historic preservation community's concern, that that language be very specific and detailed and come with requirements for, someone needs to sign off on the plans. We can't just, sort of ask for this preservation and expect it to be happening. We have to have certifications. Now, I know that the city of Phoenix enacted an ordinance a couple years ago in 2016 to protect commercial properties older than 50 years. Right now, Tempe doesn't have that protection for buildings. If we have a historically protected property, there's the delay in demolition for 30 days, but if it's historic property that's commercial, 50 years or older, we don't have that protection. And I'm told from friends in the historic preservation community in Phoenix that that's been a really valuable tool for the council to use, the neighborhoods to use to protect. Yet you and I might not see it as historic or valuable, but the community very well might. So I'm interested in looking at, maybe that's a separate ordinance that we have to consider, or whether it can be included in this. I'm not sure. I'd like to know that. I watched the DRC meeting last week, and Stu Seifer, who is in the historic preservation community, is someone who I look to for advice and also for recommendations. He made a couple of points, and I discussed this with you. One is he was asking for having 30-foot step backs for higher buildings on Mill. And I understand completely when I discussed with you, you said that really can't happen because there's Prop 207 taking issues. Plus, you wouldn't want to have every tall building have that setback because it would lead to kind of a monotonous streetscape. And what we're looking for is a mix of styles. And so I understand that concern, and that was properly answered. He also mentioned that there will be this heritage core, or questioned about that, and you verified that from 4th Street to 6th Street, it now is in the plan that it's a designated heritage core. But again, that plan has to be reflected in the actual code district. We need details. We need to know who certifies that. How do we address the archaeological concerns? I mean, there's so many good things about the Urban Core Master Plan and the code, but I as an individual, and I think representative of the archaeological and the historic preservation community, really want to see the details in those bonus incentive programs. If it ends up that you only get 10 points for the same amount of points for preserving historic building as you get for installing showers for your employees who are going to bike to work, to me that's not an equivalence. And I want to make sure that historic preservation is such an important part of this plan. And I know that in the case of the Tomlinson Estates and the Borden homes, there is a cultural resource area in Apache, the Apache district, that is protected, and I'm really glad to hear that. I also have concerns, though, if a home from the Tomlinson Estates or Borden homes that's somewhat protected borders an area that's not in that cultural resource area, why that height could really impact that historic property. So I'm hoping, and I think you guys told me that there's buffer zones built into cultural resource areas at Apache as well as there are in Maple Ash. So just to sum up, I just want to ensure that the language in our code protects properties that are identified as historic, that archaeologically sensitive areas that will be uncovered literally and figuratively when we do our historic inventory, which is a delightful addition to all of this planning. And thank you, Deputy City Manager Stephen Methvin, for really advocating and championing that, because it's not a cheap process to do a historic inventory. And how much is it, like 400,000? Even more. It's a lot of money, but we have it in the budget. We haven't done it in decades, and it's a really important thing. But I want to make sure that what we uncover there is protected in the language that we develop. And that language that we develop needs to be as specific as possible. Lastly, I'd like just to say that I know we've really consulted with the development community in the past few weeks, and a lot of concerned residents who have concerns about, or developers concerns about specific properties and areas. I think we need to really reach out to the historic preservation community on that language that is coming out, that specific language that will come from that incentive bonus program that's being developed by the consultants. And I'm sure you have that in mind already, but to me, the historic preservation community really has an eye for the details, and the devil's in the details. Thank you.
Thank you. I think some of the takeaways, thank you again for everything. I think it's important that we still need to be, as a council, engaged with your staff as you guys move through this process. That as you continue to work with the consultant, as Councilman Navarro mentioned, work with our consultants to find out some information on the heights. I know we're looking at possibly lowering the UC1 area, that's to see if it's feasible, but I think it's important that we identify what the proposed incentives are. Historic preservation, sustainability, public amenities, affordable, housing, from workforce housing and affordable housing. What do those incentives look like? And I'd like to hear from the consultant to report, if you guys could help report back to the council on some of those changes. I think that would be very, very key as we move forward. I think it's important that we do have a say in this as projects come to the downtown, and when they opt in, that if they're looking for any type of bonuses and looking for incentives, that obviously the council like to be a part of that, because we're looking at how we're going to shape our community.
That would be good, Mayor. Good point, maybe to start to wrap up on. We don't want to cut the discussion short. We're happy to take as much input as you're willing to give so we can address it. The level to which council is involved in decision making is still relevant to us in terms of designing the processes. So the way we've got it designed right now would be that at that base level of opt-in, that would be just like the base level of zoning we have today. That would go to a
Right.
DRC design review.
So our 15-story building can go in without any process in the council, it goes right to DRC. So that's why I think it is more important that not only do we get a say of some of the structures that are coming in place to meet some of the goals that we have, I think that's important to this council.
So the question would be, if we got that height fixed to a more palatable level, would that still want to come to council? I mean, are there any, maybe the question is simpler, are there any developments that you would want to not come to council?
In that downtown area,
I think in the downtown,
in that core.
in the core, we definitely would like to
In
have
the
some
urban
say.
core, it sounds like the council would
least for
like
the
to have
first
that
couple
option.
The downtown, like UC 1 and 2?
I would, and to that point, probably for the first couple of years, and then we can try to manage it from there. But I just think it's strategically important that we do have a say. It's the one shot, and we only have so
And
much
we're
room.
ultimately responsible. so
Yeah,
I think
whether. Okay. So you're going to continue to engage some of the stakeholders that we mentioned before, some of the potential developers and our partners, then also with the consultants on the proposed incentives that we're looking at. And also, obviously, historic preservation, public amenities, sustainability, traffic. I mean, obviously, trip reductions is a big one that Robert talked about, Mr. Chavez. That's all part of our plan. Okay? We're good?
Thank you.
Chad, before your team leaves, can you just repeat back what you hear in terms of the consensus and direction you're getting?
Yeah,
Just so we're all clear.
I think we're going to at least work to provide extra information on a lot of things. The consensus, the specific things we heard was to reach out to development folks and consult them on the heights and potentially bring the heights, at least the 160 number was one that caused concern, bring that down to some other level.
And just,
I think in any heights that it would come back.
well, my thought process was, I love to hear what their feedback is on certain heights and what their concerns might be, so to speak. Give us a better gauge on if we're going to lower them or higher them or whatever like that. I want to hear just why they prefer this way or that way, just some feedback on that.
Okay. And then the second.
Clear that obviously they want to go higher, but at least if they go higher, we get something out of that for our community. That's what we're looking for.
They might have some ideas.
Good question.
Yeah, Councilman.
So we're saying that no matter, so say we lower the height to 100 feet. We're saying that even if we lower the heights to 100 feet, they're coming back for council approval. We're not saying that, or we are saying?
If they any increased heights, if they want to go above 100.
Say it's 100 feet, and then that's not coming to council, but 110 feet will? Is that it?
Councilman Hernandez.
Well, can I get an answer to that?
Yeah, no,
We're people going to
I'm
answer.
going to, because I was the one that said it, right? So I'm more than happy to answer it. I don't really know what the answer is, but what I want to say is anytime I think we're changing the height, yes, I do think it needs to come back through the council, and the council needs to have a role.
I do.
Whatever that is. I don't think we've decided what that magic number is or how we're going to make sure that
We don't know what the right.
we don't know what that height is yet. And if it's easier to make the whole process that way through the whole, through the whole urban core, that's totally fine. If we want to alter the process, that's another thing. But I'd prefer to have a little bit more responsibility from the council that we can release in a year or two, like Councilmember Navarro said. So that's my personal opinion.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I must have misheard then, because I thought we were saying that no matter what the height is, if you are within your rights to build 100 and you build 90, it still comes to council, and obviously I was wrong.
Right.
So I was saying that kind of takes away we can't do the 15 stories because we want to control what's there. That's not what we're saying. I was mistaken.
Okay.
So to try and restate, I did, what I wrote down specifically was that in urban code 1 and 2, which is the downtown area, that the council wanted to be the decision maker on all projects. Is there a base level of height where you wouldn't want to be?
No, because I wouldn't want to go too
I'd
low.
say no for right now.
Yeah.
Just until we get some more information back.
That's what I wrote down a couple minutes ago, but we can certainly continue to work to reach out to you and refine it in this direction. I think we have some general direction, and if we get the numbers right, we'll work with you on those.
Councilmember Adams.
Just to be clear, then we will be looking at every project, correct? Is that what we're saying?
Just in downtown.
In the downtown, UC 1 and 2 is what I'm hearing.
Okay, all right, thank you.
How does that contrast with what's happening
Well,
now?
right now we don't.
Well, so it's difficult to say exactly. Right now, if you make use of your base district regulations, none of it in any of the districts would go to council. The things that you're seeing now are all of the PADs, which is where they're striving for
Right.
much
Right,
taller,
right.
which is commensurate with the bonus provision, which is why at least originally we didn't make the base district a council item. But we can certainly do that in the downtown if there's an interest there. So we weren't trying to cut you out of it. We were trying to create a smooth process. But
So we don't do that now.
Yeah, and I guess my thought process is too, is I'm just really concerned about what's happening operation-wise behind those walls. So I think for us to be able to kind of understand and make sure we're on good footing and moving forward and getting the type of projects that we want, I do think it's our responsibility, regardless of whatever that height is, until we make sure that we're on solid footing and be able to move forward. Doesn't mean we can't change it later. So whether we work for 2 years and, we go with 1 and 2 for now, I mean, that's fine if that's what the council chooses. But I do think it's our responsibility to make sure that, we are getting the incentives that we want, that we're being responsive to our residents, but also making sure that we know what the operations are going on. Because if it doesn't come to the council, we'll never know. I mean, for all you know, it could end up with a student housing project that says it's not, but ends up being. And I don't want to bash on student housing, because I think it's really important that we have really great student housing. And we've built a solid relationship with ASU, and we've worked really, really hard to work on our future student housing projects. But at the same time, I think if it doesn't come before the council, then, whose responsibility is that going to be? And ultimately, it's ours. That's my 2 cents.
Vice Mayor?
But I have some concern, and I think it's based on my own ignorance of what comes to council now and what doesn't come to council. And I don't want us to set up a structure that's so complicated that we've built this incentive program, and then we've told developers who are willing to be the good actors and agents who want to build affordable housing, whatever, like, we're going to make you go through an incredible rigmarole, and in turn, you're going to get this benefit and this incentive. I get that, but I'm just not clear what we're really agreeing to here. I want to know sort of what we have now in terms of what percentage of the TOD do we see now, and I'm just not clear about, I don't think I'm ready to make a decision tonight about what should come to council and what shouldn't. Because if somebody is adapting, we talk about that we want to get affordable housing developed, that people need to come to us from the beginning and work and understand the rules of the game, and maybe even get permits, relief of permit fees and relief of the time, and get strategically put to the top of the list. And that's one of the incentives we're talking about. But if we say, no, we're going to really complicate this process, and you're going to get an incentive, but you're going to have to go through so much that you never had to go through, talking to the council and having individual meetings with them. And I just think we might be ending up in a whole really complicated world. I just don't understand. I don't know if we understand that completely right
Can
Robert?
I just, well, no, and I would say, I think you brought up a really good point, and I don't disagree with that. And it doesn't mean that the process has to be like a PAD either.
Right.
I think we can make it what it is, so at least we can see it and maybe have some input, and maybe, I think we can make it what it is we want it to be. So I would ask our staff to kind of listen to what they've heard today in regards to maybe some of our concerns, and see what they bring back and what would really work. And if it's the downtown area that's our biggest concern, then let's just make sure that we do have a little bit of say in regards to that downtown area, and that we're getting the incentives that we want, but not making it so complicated so we're not business friendly at the same time.
I think we agree. And because I was seeing in the case of Hayden House, and that was a long drawn out process of getting the agreements for the historic preservation. And if that's all written into the code, that here's the language, you want to do a property, you want to give in your points to historic preservation, boom, this is it. We don't necessarily have to go through a process like, oh, we're going to actually tweak that language a little bit, and this is different. And, the beauty of some of this is that we're setting up standards that are going to make it easier for council, easier for community development and staff, and then easier for developers. And that's a win-win-win for everyone.
Councilman Navarro?
Yeah, and Mayor, that's the whole point of the thing is I know more like on developers, they're going to tell you what they want to have, but I just kind of want to hear what they have to say and why their complication is their complication. I'm agreeing that we should have a little more control and teeth in that downtown area because it's a one-shot deal. But at the same time, when you come back with some more information, I might be a little bit better educated to see why, and maybe loosen up here or loosen up there if needed. That's the only thing I'm trying to get to.
We're good?
Mm.
Crystal?
Clear.
First month.
Clear as mud.
No, this is, this is an update and we're going through the process. So thank you everyone for the comments.
Thank you very much.
All right. Next item, speed limits, setting speed limits. All right.
Mayor, Council, thank you very much for having me today. My name is Julian Driesang. I'm the City of Tempe traffic engineer, and I'm joined today with Lieutenant Peterson from the Traffic Bureau from the Tempe Police Department. I'm excited to come here today to give you an update on speed limits. We presented to you last May, and we've had some changes and discussions and a Vision Zero action plan that have come in place since then. And so we're looking to give you an update from there and then look at how we can move forward at this point. So this is really to further our goal to reduce crashes, particularly fatal and serious injury crashes in the city of Tempe. And we call that our Vision Zero program for City of Tempe. As I was getting ready for this presentation, I decided to do just a little bit of a history check on speed limits, and I'm just going to share with you a few points here. The first gasoline-powered automobiles traveled at a maximum speed of about 13 miles per hour, and the first posted speed limits were actually in England, where it was 5 miles per hour in the towns and 2 miles per hour, or 5 miles outside of the towns and 2 miles in the cities. So you can see that even at the early onset of motor vehicles, we were creating motor vehicles that traveled at much higher speeds than what we were hoping that they would maybe do in the urban areas. This third bullet point I thought was really interesting. So automobiles were required to have 3 operators, 2 of which that traveled in the vehicle and 1 that walked in front of the vehicle to warn pedestrians and equestrians of the oncoming motor vehicle. So it's amazing how things have changed since the beginning of the automobile and where we are today. So in May 2018, we presented to the mayor and council about speed limits, and we were at that point just focusing on just a few locations. There was 9 arterial streets, 9 collector streets, and then trying to address the 35 mile per hour high school zones. And the reason that we looked at those was using some pretty specific criteria. So we weren't using a comprehensive analysis or a comprehensive look at speed limits. We were just looking at these 4 bullet points here at the bottom, those being the 35 mile per hour high school zones, locations where there was some inconsistency or discontinuity along a corridor, where there were arterial mid-block changes, so where the speed limit changed midway along an arterial block, which is, from a driver standpoint, can be confusing or unexpected. And then finally, we wanted to look at speeds on some recently completed streetscape projects to see if there was any change in driver behavior as a result of those. At that meeting, we got direction to, seemed to be support for changing the 35 mile high school zones that are currently signed as 24 hours, 7 days a week, where we know that we're not getting very good compliance. There was a desire to take a look at those and see how can we improve compliance when we had the highest amount of pedestrians, the highest amount of students in those areas. And so some of our neighboring communities have gone to some flashing lights, and so there's a direction that when you see these flashing lights, drivers are aware that students may be present and that we may be able to get a higher chance of getting compliance at that time where we really want to accommodate the safety of those students. And so we did go out to the school districts, as you asked, and we talked to those schools, and they were in agreement that that there would be value in potentially converting these 24-hour, 7-day-a-week high school speed zones to these 35 mile per hour during specific times.
Vice Mayor Cuey.
Thank you for going out to the school districts. I really appreciate that because that was an important bit of feedback. But I just have a question. So we know that schools don't necessarily operate in the stated school hours, but there could be school assemblies or sporting events or cultural events. So what happens in those cases if there's a theatrical performance? Can it be keyed so the flashing lights will be going off during that time, which is not a traditional school hour?
Absolutely. So what our neighboring communities are doing, it says 35 mile per hour zone when lights are flashing. And so there's flexibility then when those lights are flashing, and we can work with the school districts to determine when that would be activated, so that we could then accommodate high school graduations or football games and some of those outside. And I think that was originally the real intent of this program, if I understand correctly. How it's currently signed was we knew that there's higher times of the day or days of the week, and so instead of trying to post those statically on a sign, it was just became easier to do 24 hours, 7 days a week. But we're getting the intention as well, but we know that from we get the feedback from our community that at 3 a.m. on a Sunday is there really that level of pedestrian or vulnerable students and such to necessitate those changes. So we're really trying to we're hoping that by kind of focusing on those specific times, that drivers will appreciate that there may be students and in the area, and then accommodate their driving.
That communication channel will be an established channel?
Yeah, we would communicate with the schools and would work with them through that process. Because each school probably would have different needs, and so we'd work with them individually.
Thank you.
So, so the presentation we gave was a little over a year ago, was in May of 2018, and at that time was also when we were kicking off our Vision Zero strategic action plan. And so very early on in that process, we did a lot of data analysis. We thought that was important to understand where needs are, so we could focus our limited resources and time appropriately and really make the change that we're hoping to make. And it became apparent very early that speeding was an issue that needed to be addressed in this plan. And so instead of making the proposed changes and then perhaps coming back a year later and making additional changes, we thought it would make sense and behoove us to delay making any changes until so that we could address them more comprehensively and really understand through the Vision Zero action plan if there were specific strategies that may lend themselves to speed limits. And here's some of that data that we looked at. This is actually available on our Vision Zero website. The public has access to this. Any students, anybody that has interest in this, I encourage them to check this out. And we've shared this with the mayor and council before, but it's really an interactive tool to understand and share, and for people to understand where crashes are happening. And this is historically information that just we in traffic engineering had, but we think it's important that it gets shared. So between 2012 and 2017, we had 550 crashes in the city that were either fatal and serious injury. Obviously, there was more than that, but we're really focusing on the fatal and serious injury crashes. And of those 550, 108 of those related to speeding too fast for conditions or exceeding the speed limit.
Councilmember Keating. Thank you, Mayor. Julian, could you explain the difference between too fast for conditions and exceeding the speed limit?
I'm actually going to ask that Lieutenant Peterson from the police department answer that. He's much more of an expert than I am.
Sure.
As we all know what the speed limit is. The speed limit is what's posted on our roadways. Under Arizona state law 28701A, it goes by speed greater than reasonable and prudent. And that's when you're saying speed too fast for conditions. I'll give you just a very broad or narrowly focused example. Say you're driving down Guadalupe Road, the speed limit is 45 miles per hour, but it's in the middle of a monsoon where your visibility is 20 feet, right? Driving 45 miles an hour is too fast for that condition, so it's beyond the speed that's reasonable and prudent.
I have a follow-up question to that then. So is that weather-related events then? I mean, is it possible to be driving too fast for conditions while going the speed limit?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we'll use rush hour again as an example. You're driving down the freeway, the speed limit on, I believe, the US 60, I'm going to use that as an example, is 65 miles an hour. But in the height of rush hour, what is the average speed at rush hour? Yeah, maybe 20. So if some car is trying to go 65 miles an hour, that's, again, a speed that's greater than reasonable and prudent under the existing conditions.
So it's not all weather related? I guess
No,
that's kind of
it's
feedback.
based on the conditions at the time, traffic.
Right.
You know, matter of fact, as we go to court, we always talk about the traffic conditions at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any way to find out of the crashes that you talk about, like you mentioned 100, what of those, you referenced speed, but what about distracted?
Distracted driving, so do you want me?
Yes, please.
Distracted driving is a difficult one to talk about because after the fact it happens, we really rely on driver honesty. And you know, I hate to say it, but we ask, well, were you on your phone? No. And, you know, fortunately, the council had the foresight ahead of the state to enact 1955A, the new updated distracted driving ordinance in February. And we went through the educational period. And from that time, from April to date, we have written about over 500 citations now that we can actually stop vehicles and when we see them on their device.
Oh, wow.
And that's very proactive because we're preventing a collision from occurring.
Wow, that's interesting.
Back to the
532.
speed too fast for conditions. So this, like say I'm going to work in the morning, I'm in McClintock, and I often do, and I'm going, 45 miles an hour as a speed limit, but in rush hour, maybe then that doesn't give me enough time to stop before rear-ending a car if I'm not checking my phone, but somehow totally distracted. Is that sort of, I'm just having a hard time understanding exactly like.
Again, state statute requires you to maintain a speed and distance in order to avoid a collision. So that is also, would fall under speed related and under in a collision.
I guess, could we just walk me through how, and I'm not against lowering the speed limit. I'm going to say that right now. Like, I think you guys are doing a great job, whatever. How would lowering the speed limit combat those types of accidents?
Well, as you look at speed in itself, if you're driving at, let's say, 35 miles per hour, you're driving at approximately 51 feet per second. 45 miles an hour, 66 feet per second. So as we do that, as we look at that, so you're traveling 45 miles an hour, and I'm going to use distracted driving as an example because that's kind of how I looked at it. And you look away for like 4 seconds, all right? You have traveled 88 yards. And if you look at your braking distance, all right, that's by the time you notice something. So then you have perception, and then you have your reaction, and you're going to go another 196 feet before you actually come to a stop.
Okay, so it's a matter of control of the vehicle and response time.
Yes, that's kind of like, lowering the speed limit. Say if you're standing at that end of the room,
right,
and a car recognizes you here, how fast do you want that car to go?
Thank you.
Can you stop? Can that car stop in time?
Great, thank you, Lieutenant Peterson. So just to walk you through this, a little bit of this data real quickly. In the middle bottom, we see that the most common crash types when we're talking about speed-related crashes lend themselves to rear end, which I think speaks kind of to what we're talking about right now. If someone has more time, is driving at a slower speed, has more time to react, has more time to brake. And then we also see single vehicle crashes where driving at high speeds, vehicles can lose control of the vehicle and collide with. We've seen trees and most recently a railroad gate. So when you lose speed, you stop when something slows you down, right? Then moving to the top right, we see a graph that shows the kind of historical trends, and we're between 2012 and 2015. Interestingly enough, we saw speed-related crashes trending in the right direction, lowering, and then in 2016, those crashes we saw an increase, and then even higher in 2017. And so some of this is just a fact that we have more crashes in general. So just because we're seeing these as speed ones, I don't want to say that that's necessarily the only reason, but I think distraction plays into that. A lot of these play into that, but we do know that speeding is an issue that needs to be addressed. And then to the bottom right, we see that our younger drivers in the range of about 19-year-old to 25 are overrepresented in these high-speed crashes. Part of that is they're less experienced. We also know that they tend to be more risk takers, and so this is consistent with crash data in general. But as we see the downtown develop and ASU enrollment seems to continue to increase, which is really good. But that just means that we also have more younger drivers traveling on our streets.
So I was curious on top of right, any curiosity why 2012, 2015 were downturning?
What was that?
The graph on the top, it from 2012 to 2015, we had a down slope in, I believe, collisions,
That would be speed-related
speed-related incidents.
fatal and serious injury crashes. Yes, sir.
Any reason why we trimmed it down in those years?
It's really hard to know these trends. We can surmise that distracted driving is more prevalent. I don't think it has to do with enforcement. I know that Lieutenant Peterson and his staff, through all those years, has engaged in active enforcement. So I can't say for sure. There's definitely we could take different guesses at why that might be, but no, I wish we kind of could have continued that trend that was started in 2012 to 2015, but I think it just reinforces the fact that we need to try to address speeding as best we can. This next slide kind of speaks to what Lieutenant Peterson was talking about earlier, so I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time on it, but it just helps us understand how speed affects safety. So the main being that that just at high speeds, there's a greater chance of being involved in a crash that results in injury. And then at the higher speed, those injuries, it's a higher chance of them being more severe and potentially fatal. And so Lieutenant Peterson did a good job of talking about stopping distance. I'm going to run through it real quickly, but imagine you're the green car in this picture and a group of students walks out in the street. There's a certain amount of time that it takes for your brain to realize that there's students in the street and to send a signal to your brain to say they're students and you need to stop, and then send a signal down to your foot to depress the brake. In that amount of time, you're still traveling the same speed you were when the students entered the street. And so you travel a certain amount of distance. Then once you brake, then you come to a skid and hopefully stop before you're reaching those students. That's your braking distance. And so that total amount of distance, we call that the stopping distance. And so then moving to the chart on the left, you can see at lower speeds, in the 10 to 15 mile per hour range, your stopping distance is very short, approximately 25 feet, and the resulting risk of getting involved in a crash or a fatal crash is very, very low. Moving then to 20 to 25, your stopping distance doubles, but your crash risk triples, and your fatality risk increases. And then when you start to get at the bottom of this, at the 40 plus range, you see that your stopping distance is much, much more. Your crash risk is much, much higher, and your fatality risk as well. So it just reinforces the fact that lower speeds, you have more control of the vehicle, better chance to react and make the necessary stop if necessary, which at higher speeds, you don't. Even if you know that you need to stop, it's just hard to stop it in that distance. So now to the subject of setting speed limits. There's kind of within traffic engineering, there's 4 general approaches that exist. The first being the engineering approach, and this is the most common that's used across the United States, and that's to use the 85th percentile speed, which is simply the speed in which 85% of the traffic is going at or below, and using that as your starting point, and then looking at other factors and adjusting maybe plus or 5 miles per hour up or down. What we're doing there is pretty much we're saying that the driver is going to dictate what the speed limit is when you use the 85th percentile. Another approach is to use an expert systems approach, and this is really to use a computer algorithm where you input a lot of data. You might input geometry, you might input the width of the lanes, and the number of lanes, and the traffic volumes, and the number of historical crashes. And you enter all this data into a computer program that somebody's written, and it spits out what a speed limit on that segment of the street might be. What we find when I was researching this is that it's extremely data hungry, and then you can get a lot of inconsistency. So maybe this 1 mile segment, the computer program says 45 miles per hour is appropriate, and then the next segment it says that at 25 miles per hour. Obviously, we don't want a corridor that's going 45 to 25 to 30. It's what we're trying to move away from, having consistency, having that driver expectation. The next, I couldn't find anybody that's actually using this, but I'll explain just briefly anyway, is called optimization, and it's trying to optimize the total societal cost. So there's a societal cost for crashes, there's a societal cost for people's travel time, there's a societal cost for emissions, there's a large number of different societal costs when you look at our transportation system. And this the goal of this one is to optimize those, which sounds really good in theory. And I was curious to see if I could find anybody that was actually trying to take that on. And it doesn't really currently exist. And it's something I'd like to continue to keep an eye on and watch, because I think it is very interesting. And I think all those different components are important to any transportation system. But at this point, using it to set speed limits, I don't think makes a lot of sense. It needs to be looked into further.
Julian, just to say that I'm married to an optimization modeler, so I get what you're saying.
All right. Maybe he can help us develop that further. Finally, the safe systems approach, which I'll be talking about further in this presentation, but it has the goal of minimizing injury. And so it really is in line with what we've talked about historically about Vision Zero. And so I did make a comment here at the bottom that approach number one is definitely the most common used approach here in the United States. But when you look at Vision Zero cities in the United States, approach number 4, the safe systems approach, is the most common that's being used. As we talk about safe systems and how it relates to Vision Zero, Vision Zero brings a safe systems approach to transportation planning, priorities, and implementation. And it recognizes that humans are going to make mistakes. So as I've talked about Vision Zero, I've reinforced that there's a human component to this. We have drivers, they're going to make decisions. We're hoping that as we have, these new vehicles that are smarter, and we can maybe move away from some of that. But in our existing system, we have drivers making errors, and we want to make sure that when those errors happen, it doesn't result in death or serious injury. And so we're not going to get perfect behavior, but we can make sure that nobody's getting seriously hurt. And within the safe systems approach, it's just speed is just one of like 4 categories that we're talking about. You have to have safe streets, which means safe design of these streets so people can drive at reasonable speeds. Then you have your safe speeds. You also, there's so much great technology. So we have safe vehicles that have airbags, that have braking systems that help vehicles stop even before the driver realizes it. There's a lot of great safety features that are coming out on that realm. And then we have to have safe people. We have to have safe drivers that are educated. We have to, not just drivers, but cyclists, pedestrians, all users of our system. So to have a real safe systems approach, speeds is just one of the 4 categories that need to be addressed. I mentioned earlier about our Vision Zero action plan. There were a couple strategies I just wanted to highlight in that plan that related to speed limits and safe systems. The first being to initiate a citywide speed limit evaluation with the safe systems approach to incorporate other critical factors such as crash history and the safety of people walking and bicycling. And then also to address the issue that we talked about earlier about the high school 35-mile-per-hour zones and potentially using the flashing lights.
Councilmember Adams.
Yes, I just was wondering what are our neighborhood cities doing in relation to the speed? Like the other cities, Chandler, Mesa, the other
which
cities?
approach they were being?
Yes. Have they been making changes or?
From what I'm aware of, talking with representatives from other cities, they tend to use the engineering approach to use the 85th percentile and adjust either way.
But I mean, in relation to the speed limits, are they changing theirs down also?
So if the decision is to move forward with some of the changes that we're proposing, I've already reached out to some of our neighboring communities from Chandler and Phoenix to make sure that obviously our drivers don't necessarily understand our borders. We know where those jurisdictional limits are. And I've already reached out to let them know that this is something that we're looking at. And I think that there's interest in adjusting some of that to our neighboring cities. But for the most part, we really get concerned when you have a speed differential of 10 miles per hour or more. And in all the scenarios that we're looking at, that would not exist.
But doesn't exist from Chandler to Mesa on the Tempe borders?
No, there wouldn't be anywhere. There would be a greater than 10 mile per hour speed differential. The closest we have is at town of Guadalupe, where they have 25 mile per hour speed limits citywide.
But like if we're 45 now, what's Chandler? Like if you look at Elliott or Mesa, for example, on Southern.
Some of them are 45, some of them are 40, some of them, like I know on Apache's 35. So that was something that we would want to take a look at as we go through this. But we know what their speed limits are, and so we went through a look at that when we addressed speed limits in 2007, and we would continue to do that again. But we do know their speed limits, and we would work with them to make sure that there isn't any surprises. We definitely don't want surprises.
Well, in the case of Phoenix, I know they had initially a rough patch in trying to introduce the Vision Zero concept and goal, and we're the only city in Arizona to yet adopt that goal. But I know for a fact that Mayor Kate Gallego is not giving up, and with the newly constituted council, she's really interested in going back and adopting a Vision Zero approach. And with that would come reduced speed limits if they are actually walking the walk and talking the talk.
Right.
So that's something to look forward to.
And I think you'll see further in the presentation, we're not looking with this initial change with any real drastic changes. It's typically in the range of 5 to 10 miles per hour that we're looking at, which is consistent with some of our neighboring communities. And so for this slide, using the current engineering approach that we've used historically, our maximum arterial speeds are in the range of about 35 to 45 miles per hour. Collector streets 25 to 35, and our local and neighborhood streets follow this kind of the state statute, whether it's signed or not, of 25 miles per hour. What could Tempe's speed limits look like if we decide to go with the safe systems approach? We really start to take a more closer look on who our users are of the system, and so we would have a maximum arterial speed maybe where there's low bike activity of 40 miles per hour, kind of getting away from this 45 miles per hour that worked for us for a long time when we were a more less urban city, but really we've become quite an urban city. And so as we went this Vision Zero process, there was a lot of discussion about that 45 still seems high for where we currently are as a city. So the maximum range being at 40 miles per hour, then then that speed limit dropping as bicycle pedestrian activity, as our amount of vulnerable users is higher. So with a medium bike ped activity at 35, and then high at 30, very high. I don't want to scare anybody. The only spot I could see this happening would be Mill Avenue between University and Rio Salado, where you really have high density, really high dense signals. To be quite honest with you, I'd be surprised if there's any time in the day where you could drive 30 miles per hour currently, just because of that amount of activity and density. Then finally, maximum collector streets in the range of 25 to 30 miles per hour. And I put local neighborhood streets as 20 to 25, as I mentioned earlier, by state statute. These areas are naturally at 25. Some other cities are looking at 20 miles per hour. I don't think that we would be focusing on that at this point, but it's something to take in mind. When we're talking about streets and looking at our data, we're seeing that it's primarily on our these crashes aren't happening in our neighborhood streets. They're more on our collectors and arterial network. So here's a map of what our speed limits could look like if we went with the safe systems approach. If you look at the map on the left, this is our existing system. The lines that you see in red are 45 miles per hour, black 40, green is 35. The kind of tan is our 35 mile per hour high school zones. There's a few that have a 30 mile per hour, and then I already mentioned the pink, which would be a 25 mile per hour. So you can see right now it's kind of a mix. We have these corridors where the speed limit goes from 35 to 45, then down to 40, then to 35, then to 40. It's really difficult for drivers to know that, and there's so much that they have to pay attention to just from driving, and then also have to try to understand all those changes. So you can see on the left there's still a lot of 45 mile per hour zones, and then when you move to the right, what we're looking at is having a maximum of 40 miles per hour. If you're south of Southern, that's pretty much all 40 miles per hour, with the exception of Kyrene, which for those of you who've driven on that, it's a 2-lane road. Although it's an arterial, it doesn't really fall on our arterial grid. Otherwise, north of there, it's primarily 35 miles per hour, with the exception of right around ASU, where we're looking at potentially 30 miles per hour, that and Tempe Beach Park. So it really helps to kind of just clarify for our drivers, if you're north of Southern, if you're on Southern north of there, 35 miles per hour, south of there, 40 miles per hour, we lose a lot of that discontinuity. We get rid of some of these mid-block changes. And so we know that there's a large amount of crashes in the north part of the city. We know that's where we see our higher amounts of pedestrians and bicyclists. So that's really kind of how we move forward with this proposal. This has come up a lot of times when I'm talking to people about speed limits, and there's this concern that if you have lower speeds, that's going to just make congestion work. And so I just like to kind of speak to that and dispel some of those rumors. Congestion is really a function of delay, not speed. So if you can imagine, the worst gas mileage you're going to get is when you're going 0 miles per hour, when you're sitting at a red light. If you're moving, that's completely better than not moving at all. So when we talk about congestion, we're really talking about delay. And then also as traffic engineers, we set what we call a progression speed. So our goal is to try to keep traffic moving along an arterial corridor. And we typically use the speed limit or right around the speed limit. Part of it depends on the spacing of signals and such. I don't want to get into all the details of that, but we try to maintain a progression speed. And what we find is drivers, if they're driving in excess of that speed, they're hitting every single red light. And that's because they're not traveling at that progression speed. They're just pretty much speeding to the next red light. And I think we've all dealt with this before. When we're in a hurry to get somewhere, it feels like we're getting stopped the most. And part of that it lends itself to that. So if we want to address congestion, we really have to look at where is delay taking place. And there's two types of delay. We have reoccurring delay, and this is the delay that happens daily, primarily during our rush hours, and is just a result of more vehicles than an intersection can handle. So we have a limited amount of green time for each direction. We try to move as many vehicles as we can through that, but anytime someone has a green light, the other opposing direction has a red light. So when we talk about recurring delay in Tempe, it's really at our intersection. It's just a matter of more traffic than we can handle. Then there's the other side is non-recurring delay, and this is delay that we really can't plan for. It's primarily a result of crashes, work zones, and then other miscellaneous blockage. So theoretically, if we are to lower speed limits, it should result in less crashes, which should reduce that non-recurring delay. Also, low speed crashes tend to be less severe and can be moved out of the street more quickly. And so there's value to that from a congestion standpoint. When we talk about work zones, we've been working really diligently to try to keep construction work outside of the morning and afternoon commute, trying to have that work take place between 8:30 and 3:30, and we've really made inroads with those projects in that regard. And then lower speeds allow traffic to maneuver when there is unexpected things in the roadway, such as debris or disabled vehicles and other blockages similar to that. I was able to share a lot of this presentation with our Transportation Commission, and they were supportive of going with this safe systems methodology, and the only addition that they added was they really see Apache Boulevard between Mill and the East City border as kind of a multimodal corridor that they thought needed extra attention as a safety multimodal corridor, and they recommended a speed limit on that portion of Apache, where I had as 35 on the previous map to be 30 miles per hour. So I thought we'd share that with you.
Vice Mayor Kuby?
Do you agree with that recommendation? It makes intuitive sense to me that, because it's along the streetcar route as well.
Yeah, I think there is value. It's currently 35 miles per hour, so a 5 mile per hour drop would be consistent with some of the other recommendations that we're making. The development along there continues to grow. We're continuing to see these developments that really want to embrace this multimodal nature. It's got the light rail there. And so I think that there's a lot of sense to that. We were trying to be, I think, delicate to making changes, but not going too drastic. And so I think there's value to that, and we would be supportive of that.
Councilor Navarro?
Thank you, Barrett. Just, as you guys are going through this stuff and going through the process of reducing our speeds in certain areas, a couple things. If we do reduce speeds, especially in the South Tempe area, is this a permanent, are we stuck with what we're trying to achieve? I guess, is there a pilot process to test how we're doing, or if it makes sense? And these are just questions that came up through emails I've gotten. And that's one question I just want to ask you guys. I mean, is there something that we might consider going back to say, you know what, 45 seems reasonable? And I don't know how that would happen, but just trying to.
The speed limits are within city code, so any change to the speed limit is a change to city code. So that if we were to change it, there's nothing that would prevent mayor and council from changing that back. I think that we would want to do some kind of before-after analysis to determine what changes, what we did and what impact that would have. So We would generally want to leave a certain amount of time for behavior to change before we would want to study that and then make changes. But absolutely, that's your role as mayor and council to make those. And we
Right. And the other thing is, and this is probably for us down the road, the talk about, I know on university we didn't actually lessen the lanes. Did we do lessen lanes on university by chance from 2 to 3 or 3 to 2?
No, we haven't.
Yeah.
On
So,
Broadway, we did make a
but on university, just for example. But the fact is that we did median improvements. So we established medians with growth of trees and vegetation and whatnot. And my thought is with the council, and obviously we see natural reductions in speed because of how the street is designed. In South Tempe, we have an opportunity. I'm not saying reducing or taking lanes away, but in areas we probably have an opportunity to add islands, and twofold is to hopefully slow it down too naturally. But in addition, the heat island effect with trees and everything else, it's a twofold and a twofer, and it's the appearance of the city. And I would propose that the council as a possibility down the road as it hits a variety of different items in terms of our tree growth, climate change, little things like that, but controlling the speed and just the visibility of that too. I think that might be also a win for us.
Thank you.
Don't we have islands on Elliott and Warner?
We do have islands on
I thought
Elliott.
we already have them.
But
Not
we
on
don't
Warner.
have them on Warner or on Baseline.
And Elliott's probably one where we do have the islands, and actually it's naturally not too, it's just your mental process, because it's tight. So you're not going that, we're on Warner or Rural Road, especially going south, it's opened up. That's why I'm thinking if we have the ability where it's permitted to possibly start looking in on those things.
And just to point out, we do have that as a strategy in our Vision Zero action plan. And there's a myriad of benefits. You named many of them. Also, from a pedestrian standpoint, instead of having to run across 7 lanes of traffic, a pedestrian could travel halfway, wait on the median, and then travel the other half, which it makes that process easier. So,
Yes, the neighborhood feedback is so important to us. How will you reach out to the community and get residents' feedback on this before we implement or make a decision to implement anything?
right, excellent question. And I think that speaks to this slide. So if I'll point.
I know it's on the slide, but I just was.
And I'll go into more detail.
Okay,
if you'd like.
that would be great.
So just tonight, next steps, we're hoping to get feedback on moving forward using the safe systems approach.
Councilman Keating has something.
Oh, I'm sorry. I know.
This is the last slide, right? So I'll let you finish this slide. And I have a lot of different thoughts, and so I'll let you finish.
Okay. So we want to get that feedback. We want to receive your input on using the safe systems approach. Then at this point, then what we would do is then we would go to the community and get feedback from them. And so I think we would definitely use our public meetings. We'd try to have 2 public meetings. Get that. We would work with our PIOs to use our other digital opportunities to provide feedback. And one thing that I do want to say is that we're interested in the feedback, but at the same time, we do feel that we have a role as a city, as professionals and such, to provide a safe system. And so we want to get that feedback. At the same time, I hope that you would understand that we also think that it's important for us to try to improve safety in the city and to move forward with Vision Zero and meet those priorities. So it'll be a balance, but we definitely want to get that feedback. We want to hear it. We want to understand how this will affect people, their thoughts on it. So we would go through our normal channels. We'd work with our PIOs and neighborhood services and go through that route that we normally do.
Okay, thank you.
Then assuming that we go through this process, we decide that we do or we don't, if we decide that we do want to make changes, it's a change to the city code, as I referenced earlier. So we would put together our request for council action. There would be 2 public hearings as a result of that. And then if that is passed, then again, at that point, we would work with our neighborhood services and PIOs and really get that information out so that we're not interested in surprises. We want to make sure people understand this is a safe, that this is 100% safety. We want that this is our Vision Zero program. So we're there. So we have to educate. We have to make sure people understand why we're doing this. And then at that point, we would work with our maintenance staff to change the signs, fabricate and install those, and then the education continues, right? Just because the signs are up, because we made these changes, we have to continue to make sure that people understand the importance of safety, about how they're driving and at reasonable speeds is part of this program. So the education, when we talk about enforcement, that's really just an education tool, right? It's an opportunity to make contacts and continue to educate people about the importance of driving safely. So this is the process. I'm definitely interested in hearing what you have to say, and Lieutenant Peterson, if you have questions on enforcement, I'm sure he'd be happy to answer those as well.
Councilmember Keating.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Julian. I do appreciate this. I'm very proud that Tempe is the only city in Arizona to enact Vision Zero, and I think it's definitely a worthy goal. Those of us that have worked on Vision Zero and the micromobility working group know how important safe streets are, and one of the things I would like to see in the micromobility working group and through this process is streets that are safer for people that are walking, biking, scooting, or driving. So I either had the fortune or misfortune of posting this on my Facebook page yesterday, and I'm sure you all follow it very closely. But for those of you that do not, there was a lot of pushback, and some of it you've already addressed and was in the memo, was in the slides. They didn't read the slides, didn't read the memo. It's just, this is what I think, and you guys are idiots type of mentality. It frankly kind of reminded me of McClintock, right? I mean, the amount of pushback and the tone of the pushback. And I know there was a council communicator sent about McClintock earlier today, and that was a result of that pushback and me getting attacked about McClintock while trying to educate folks on what this is. And the idea essentially is, well, how could we trust you to do this? Look how bad you messed up McClintock. This seems like a disaster. So I don't think anyone wants to see us go down that whole rabbit hole again. Certainly not me. And I think the McClintock debate, the tone and the length of it, I don't think anyone would deny kind of chilled further biking infrastructure in Tempe, because everyone's a little gun shy at this point, and I don't want to touch it either. So I totally get that. So I'm a little bit worried about a larger backlash. So my suggestions here are not to say we shouldn't do this, because it's safer. You've explained why it's safer. It makes sense for the city. My suggestions here are to say, let's try to prevent, or at least put ourselves in a position to get ahead of a potential backlash, so that if we move forward with this action, there's not future Vision Zero implementations that you bring forward to us that kind of gives us all a little bit of pause. Oh, remember when we did that speed limit thing, and that was 2 years of angry emails. And I still get angry emails about McClintock, and that's the point I made to the gentleman that emailed in the council communicator today. That's why I said what I said. It's like, dude, I still take a lot of crap for McClintock, and it was 4 years later. So here's what I'm thinking as far as getting this done and making sure we move forward in a way that makes it that future Vision Zero initiatives aren't controversial or pushed back on in a way that I think we've seen with regard to McClintock. One would be to add more public input. So traditionally, and I know you know this, I'm just saying it for the record for those watching at home and maybe those in the audience that don't know. Traditionally, we do 2 public input meetings, one during the week after work and one on the weekend for people who can't make it to one during the week. I would suggest doing at least 4, and I don't know how my colleagues feel about that number, and making sure that one of those is south of baseline, or 2 of them, I should say. So if we're doing one set is south of baseline. I think you guys talked about this. Why I apologize. My dog walker had set off my home alarm. That's why I had to take a call, because they were calling me. I don't want PD to respond to a false alarm, of course. So that's why I had to step out real quick. So I think you guys talked about this, why I stepped out. But making comparisons against neighboring cities and trying, and if there's any sort of data or at least thought around, does any inconsistency that this will create, if at all, I'm not sure, I don't know if it does, But if it does that create a hazard? I don't know. That's what I'm asking you to look into. Some sort of impact study, or maybe it's not even a study, it's just a statement or a document that kind of tries to ID and mitigate any unintended consequences of this. And I don't know what those would be, but I'm sure if we sat down and really kind of gave it a lot of thought, we could probably come up with some things that might end up not working the way that we had hoped. And again, that's just, so if there is a backlash, like, hey, now I can't get out of my neighborhood or whatever, we can say, well, we thought about that, but really that's not a problem because A, B, and C, like you did for the congestion question, which came up quite a bit in those comments on Facebook and Nextdoor. I would ask for the data in which these recommendations are being made to be available to council and our communication staff. And this is a result of, it's very intuitive that slower speeds would result in lesser accidents and certainly less fatalities. But there's a big war going on right now on Nextdoor, on my Facebook, about like competing studies. This study says that's all crap. This study says this is sacrosanct. So whatever it is, I mean, none of those are coming from a government body, by the way. So whatever it is that we are taking into account, if this is going to be the data of record as far as the recommendations are coming from, would be helpful to us so we can point to that when we're out there trying to explain, why we took the action that we're likely to take and defend staff for making those recommendations. And I'd also ask for, if this is the road we go down, and you might already have this built in, I just want to throw it out there, a 90-day education or warning campaign as far as enforcement goes. The folks that kind of, get used to, I don't know it's the speed limits, but I've been driving in Tempe for almost 20 years. So if the speed limit's lower, and I'm pulled over, I might not even know I'm speeding. Just say, hey, you know what, Keating, you're going a little bit fast. We've actually lowered this down now. This is your one and only warning type of thing. Just so that some of the pushback that I was receiving too is, the city of Tempe just wants to catch us all on gotcha tickets and raise revenue for whatever conspiracy they happen to subscribe to. So I don't know how the rest of the council feels about that, but those are things that I think will help us not only get this done, but make sure that in the future, any other new Vision Zero implementate in. I've been talking, yes, thank you. I've been talking too long. Go more smoothly as a result of kind of giving us and staff some cover to say, look, we really kind of did our due diligence on this.
Thank you. I appreciate that feedback.
Yeah.
Donald Savage.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Really, just a couple things really quick. Just first and foremost, I know there's been a lot of work going on into this proposal, so I certainly do appreciate the work and the collaboration for doing that. And I always do like consistency. I think most people know that. I really do appreciate that consistency. So, I get it, and I do think we certainly need to make some changes in our speed limits to be able to create that consistency and create safer streets. So I certainly appreciate that. I want to say thank you to the school districts for giving their feedback and I agree, because every time I'm in a school zone, I feel like everybody's passing me. So I think that's definitely something that needs to happen, or what we're doing is not really working. So that's definitely a change. One of the things I just want to bring up, and it goes back to what somebody had mentioned earlier, is Broadway Road. We shrank Broadway Road from 3 to 2, and one of the things that we did during that time was we had encouraged people to use Southern, and we had talked about that. That was part of the whole plan from the beginning. So I kind of have a little bit of a problem of making Southern a 35-mile-per-hour zone. I would kind of work to maybe keeping it a 40-mile-per-hour zone, but I'm open to it. I really would like to get that feedback. For me, I'm not comfortable without having more feedback from our residents in regards to what their thoughts are. To say yes, 100%, I'm all in, or I'm not. I want to make sure that we have some flexibility, so when we do get that feedback, some of the concerns or support, that we're able to adjust it, and then as a council, we're able to see that and help that and use that to help us make a decision. Because I think, like Councilmember Keating said, I think this is something that's a really big deal. When it touches our residents on a day-to-day basis, and on our residents that are using the streets and using it to commute or go wherever they need to go, that we need to make sure that they're part of that decision-making process. And so it's going to be really important to me that we have a lot of output, not just education in the sense of making sure they understand what safe streets mean and what we're trying to accomplish, but for them to know that they have input. And I think that's really important. I think that's the Tempe way. That's the way we've always done it. So I don't want to do it to them. I want them to be part of our decision-making process.
Great.
So that's going to be really important to me moving forward.
Okay, I did have Vice Mayor, you're next, then I have Jennifer, then Joel.
So first of all, I'd never argue against more public engagement, understanding, and education. That's crucial. And however you deem to design that, I would love to see that as well. So thank you, Councilmember Keating, for bringing that up. But we have a traffic fatality crisis in our valley, in our city, and I know I assume we all share the same feeling when we get notification from PD and a text, and it could be the middle of the night about yet another traffic fatality or a serious injury, and it makes me sick to my stomach. And when we took on this Vision Zero goal, leading the valley, leading the state, being the only city to do this, we took on a serious commitment, a solemn commitment, I would say. And I certainly want to hear, and look the same way we heard from the Transportation Commission with some suggestions and look at tweeting it. But I really think this is, and this is what I said to someone who was communicating with me and complaining, this is where we show that we are leaders and we follow through with our commitments. And to me, ultimately, we need to talk about, there may be some unintended consequences, but let's talk about the intended consequences. And the intended consequences are saving lives. And we have the most solemn commitment there. We think about if this enactment saves even one life, it will be worth it. $170,000 cost perhaps to change the signs. Is one life worth $170,000? Like, I would say yes. And I don't mean to be histrionic here, over dramatic, but to me it's such an important follow through with our Vision Zero commitment. And I do want to hear from our neighbors. And I think in South Tempe there were concerns about one woman expressed to me that those roads were built, arterial roads were built for speed, and we should keep them in the speed limits that they're currently at. But our roads are changing because we are changing. And as you said to me, Lieutenant Peterson, we are the most multimodal city in the entire state, I believe. So we have to cope with that. We have to cope with that change. And if by reducing our speed limits, and let's face it, this is an incremental step. We could even do better as far as I'm concerned, but this is incremental. If we can make that first step and really walk the walk and talk the talk of our Vision Zero goal, then we are really following through on the leadership that I think our residents expect from us. The last thing I'd like to say, and this is more of a question for you, Lieutenant Peterson, and thank you for taking the time, both writing and conversing with me on the phone today. But one thing I heard from my Facebook friends and audience, I heard a lot of actually encouragement, like this is what we need to do. I heard some concerns about enforcement, and I'm not stating this is the case, but that enforcement doesn't happen now. How is enforcement going to happen in the future? And it seemed like it was a bit of an elephant in the Facebook room that people wanted to hear more about enforcement. There's worries there'll be too much enforcement, and that is also a concern for people, but there's worries that we need, along with public education, to have an enforcement mentality. So can you talk a little bit about what Tempe PD has in mind? Should this be adopted?
That's a very good question, and you hit the nail on the head. It starts with education, and what is our goal here? Our goal really is to have voluntary compliance. As I told you on the phone earlier today, I would love to have my officers go out, do traffic enforcement, and not find a single violation. I mean, that is our goal. So how do we go about that? Just what we talked about before is what can we do to get people to obey traffic law? If everyone obeyed traffic law, we wouldn't have any issues. So what we start with is we do start with education. We are very vigilant on social media. We work with the regular media through either our PIOs or crime prevention. Every day we have personal contacts with people, just standing in line or just talking to people on the street, and we really try to have some sort of focus on traffic safety. Right now, we're really focused due to the changes in city ordinance on bicycle and scooter safety. We're really focusing on that right now and really trying to get the word out about how to be safe. And what I mentioned earlier is that we are, in my opinion, the most multimodal community in the valley, probably in the state. We have, cars, bikes, motorcycles, scooters, all sharing a roadway, and we have to do it safely. We start early. Our school resource officers, they're out there, they're talking to students on a daily basis. We participated in the ASU move-in. We met with the international students. We met with the fraternities. We met with the students that were moving into all the complexes, the apartment buildings, and we talked about traffic safety. And then again, we meet with traffic engineering. I talk to Julian almost weekly, probably, and one of the things that we're also talking about is, and part of the Vision Zero program was a fatal review committee. So we know what happens on an enforcement aspect, but are there other things that they're possibly contributing to those? Is it some sort of environmental issue? Is it a design issue or something like that that maybe we can fix? So we're looking at it from a holistic approach rather than just a violation approach. And then it comes down to the actual enforcement. I've always said enforcement is the last line of defense. When the education isn't working, when we don't have that voluntary compliance, and we eliminated all the other factors. So when I took over the traffic bureau in 2017, we sat with my supervisors, and I said, what is it we want to accomplish? And we came up with our mission, and that is to reduce collisions and enhance safety on our roadways through purposeful enforcement. That means they're not going out there and just writing tickets to write tickets. We're going out there to write tickets to prevent collisions, prevent injuries. So how do we do that? It's data driven. We look at where our collisions are occurring. What are our high collision intersections? And then we look at the corridors that lead up to those. We look at the causal factors. Is it speed? So if we know, say, let's say Southern and rural is a high collision intersection, it happens to be one of the intersections, and speed is a factor, well, sitting at the intersection is probably too late, correct? We should be before the intersection and working proactively to prevent that speed from going into the intersection and causing the collisions. We gratefully, through the council, you gave us 2 extra motor officers, and we're currently in the testing process for that. And I'm very grateful for that, because that's going to allow us, once we get those officers, to have 7-day-a-week coverage. And that's going to help us, and we're going to have overlap on our beginning of the week and end of week as well. And through our data, we look at, time of day, day of week when that's occurring. We try to staff that accordingly to have the proper people and the proper times when that's happening. We know, rush hours. We know the evening rush hour has a little bit more collisions than the morning rush hour. We also know the end of the week rush hour has a little bit more collisions than the beginning of the week. So we try to staff that and to cover it that way. We also have grants through the Governor's Office of Highway Safety. They give us very generous grants to allow us to be a force multiplier. So we have officers that are just going out there dedicated, and that's their job at that time. It's just all proactive enforcement. So they go out there and they work on that, whether it's through neighborhoods, what we call STEP, and that's basically where they can go out there and work on a variety of issues. We have bike ped enforcement. So we have all those areas that we can work on trying to create safer roadways for that. We also, through a grant, got an additional speed trailer. So we're going to have that out there. So we'll have 2. And that helps, especially in the neighborhood complaints, where we go out there in the neighborhoods. It helps remind people of their speeds. And we can collect data, again, through the speed trailer and tell us a day a week, time of day, or whatever, where we're seeing any actual speed violations, so we can focus our enforcement.
Thank you, Lieutenant Peterson.
Councilmember Keating, before you respond.
Yeah, to the Vice
Jennifer?
Mayor's point, and this is, to her comments, and I got an email, 2 emails actually, both of which seem to think I'm saying something I'm not. I'm not suggesting we don't do this, right? And I'm not suggesting someone's life isn't worth $170,000 or whatever the price tag is. What I'm suggesting is, if our goal is to win the war, but we go all in on winning the battle to the point where we can't win the war, then that's not beneficial to anybody, right? So if I want to see, and when I say unintended consequences, I mean, that's exactly what I mean. I don't say, hey, look, this is too much of a heavy lift, we can't do this. We have to be prepared to deal with those consequences, to have something to say when someone says something to us to have something to point to say, look, we've looked into that, we have it, this is why we ended up moving forward to this decision anyway. Because we're politicians here, all of us, and we are susceptible to public pressures. And I'm concerned, again, with the backlash, not saying that we shouldn't do that, because it obviously makes sense, right? It obviously makes sense. But I'm worried about future councils, future decisions we have to make being so muddied by what a backlash that could be coming. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm wrong. I just want to make sure we don't repeat past mistakes as far as doing something that's going to impact every single person that lives in this city. That's all I'm saying. So, I mean, if we could get some sort of document or some sort of thought behind it that's not me sitting here thinking about it, you know, I think that would be helpful. You know, and I think that the increased public input definitely would be helpful. So I just want to make that clear. I'm not suggesting that this is not a worthy thing to do, not a smart thing to do, not data-driven, and will not make our city safer. I'm suggesting that if there is a giant backlash, there might be other things that we could do that won't get done.
Okay, Lauren, then Councilmember Adams.
Yeah, I just want to respond. I'm sorry if you thought I was implying that you weren't supportive of that. I just want to make the point that sometimes the loudest voices in the public dialogue aren't necessarily representative of the city. And also, I just want to commend Julian and the staff and transportation, because this memo and this presentation is amongst the most clearly communicated, not study, presentation of a suggestion of a policy suggestion. I just think it was just wonderfully presented, and there's so much data here to give us evidence and data that we can push back in social media and letters. And there's a wealth of information here, and we can do more, we can do better. But I just want to commend the transportation staff, because we ultimately need to rely on you guys. You're the traffic engineers, and you bring a high level of professionalism and ethics to your task, and I really appreciate that. And I know you do too, Randy.
I just wanted to say that I agree with Councilmember Keating's idea about the 4 public meetings, at least 4 public meetings, to just get more feedback. And, you know, with those public meetings, also we learn from our residents when we have those. It's not just a one-way communication. They might have ideas or suggestions about certain traffic areas. They're the ones that are experts in their neighborhoods. And to have those public meetings and get that feedback is very important. So I just wanted to state that, and I'm not saying this is a bad idea at all. I'm supportive. I just want to have that opportunity for the residents to give you their feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Now, I just hearing what everyone's saying, you know, and being a firefighter, obviously you want to reduce accidents. Obviously, we want to reduce fatalities. With the city growing as our city is, our resources for PD and fire, you know, go down, you know, in terms of their need for crashes, car crashes. If we have the ability to stop, save lives, to reduce the manpower, and on the front line of using our resources for other needs, so to speak, that's a plus. That's a huge plus for our city, and I see the direction we're trying to achieve and go. So it's hard to me to say, no, don't do this. I totally support the fact that we need to try to drive down those fatalities, drive down those wrecks and everything like that. And you know, I could name a number of things. And I was just looking through some stuff that New York's doing in combination with street design, in combination with speed, in combination with cameras, combination with a whole bunch of other things. And there's some things that are pretty touchy. We did cameras back in the day, and it had a reduction in a variety of different areas. You know, but how far are we going to go? I mean, we have things like China's doing cameras on every little thing, and you're graded. I don't think we're trying to travel down that road either. But I think it is logical that we do get the neighborhood input on this, and it's just kind of just the lessons learned, as Councilmember Keating said, it's just like the bike paths. You know, when we implemented those, we do have to have the input from the neighbors. We do have to make sure that they're understanding the situation, the education, because a lot of this, even in the neighborhood meetings, is education on this, and education on our speeds, and education on what the reality is with our cell phones. And we're living in a different day than we were 10 years ago, for sure. So we need to make some changes, however those changes are made. But we also need to implement thoughtfully. You know, I think logically, when you think about South Tempe and you think about the streets and the roads and how they use them, I think the general public sees them as, well, they're pretty good. We don't see a lot of accidents down here, and even the data on some of this shows that even in South Tempe, you don't see the collisions as you would in more of the city, the downtown area, southern and probably north of that. So it does make some logical sense that in those areas, or especially in the downtown area, we probably do have to make a change probably relatively quickly in that area. And that's just for the cost of the business we're doing, the growth that we're seeing, and the fact that we want to use multimodal transportation in a variety of different ways and get people off the streets and use other resources. So if we're implementing some things, I think that we need to be thoughtful of implementing them in stages and getting data, getting feedback, and then making another implementation and as we go along. And I think this is not a quick process. I think this is a process that we work in stages. And I think to get to the goal, because there's so much to achieve from the information that we do in stages, in my opinion. And I think that the cost of doing business too, we also get the win with the residents to make sure that they're educated and understanding, and they can see the data on what we have achieved from implementing it in stages. I know that I probably won't please everyone on that thought, you know, but I think that it's going to be a thoughtful process, and I think that's what we need to be doing.
I just want to thank you, our staff, and Lieutenant Peterson, for everything you've done on this issue. I really appreciate the 35 zone blinking lights in cooperation with the school district. I think that is something that brings to light that, hey, you're in a school zone when the school's in at certain activities. So I think it's a really good way to help notify drivers, especially when you have special events that are non-school related. I think that's helpful as well. I agree with moving forward with the safe systems approach that was presented. We're committed to the Vision Zero as a council and as a city, and it's been noted that we take great pride that we're the only city in Arizona that has adopted a Vision Zero, and we're committed to that. And we also want to evaluate the speed limit methods with the safest approach that we can. This is in the best interest of our residents. I think the speed limits that are being proposed bring some continuity, if you look at the map, which I think is very, very important for that. I am looking forward to the public input, because it gives us the ability to discuss the changes for the upcoming agenda items. So I think having that public outreach is so critical. And of course, I can't stress this enough. I think you've heard it. Any changes we're going to make, you got to have an educational component, because that's going to be the key to the success of this, is how we roll this out, how our residents are involved in this. And I think that's where we get some of the information for the neighborhoods. So I really want to thank staff for that. Do we have anything else? Yes.
Or what Julian thinks we have consensus?
So I think we're all in agreement. But first, I think there's consensus to have public outreach of at least 4 meetings, is what I've heard. If I heard differently, can anybody tell me?
Two south of
At least 2
baseline?
south of baseline.
In comparison to neighboring cities, that can just be like a Friday memo or something.
I think that's already part of it, because I asked that question earlier, but we can get that
wasn't
information.
in the room, so that's going to be a thing. Okay, great. Impact study about unforeseen ramifications, or at least some sort of thought.
Can you elaborate?
Paper or something.
What are you looking for? I'm trying to,
yeah,
because we need to get a little more,
right? I mean, hold on, I'll bring it up. I'll bring up the things I'm seeing. We can look over the other ones though too. The 90-day education.
Be a part of, typically when you have
That's
traffic
education
changes,
plan.
there's a delay in important. I know with
Typically, when we
texting while
change the
driving,
city code, there's a time period, and I think we
Right.
can adjust that and look at what time period we want to have. But there definitely needs to be that education component, and we're aware of that. But I believe any changes to the city code is at least 60 days. Is that?
And then, based on the public input that we get from our residents before we have a first hearing and a second hearing, that all that information could change too. But I think you need to allow time for that public input.
Absolutely.
Am I missing anything else? By and large, we're looking at moving forward with what's been presented, knowing that we're going to get public input, which may or may not change how we move forward. And then the educational component. We really have to come up with an educational marketing plan proactively, I think. While this is moving forward, let's come up with something with the educational outreach side.
What about the data made available to council and our comm staff?
Absolutely, it
Studies
should
and all
be.
that, some sort of packet.
Yep.
Just combining the information that we have in our presentation, really.
But it's not, right? Because there's stuff in there that doesn't have like, it's not cited, right? Like, I don't know, I can't look it up on LexisNexis and put in the PowerPoint and get the data behind it, is all I'm saying. Like, if I have a study I can point to, that's going to help me sell this to the public.
Yes, Lauren?
May I add something? So David King, he's a transportation commissioner, and he is also a professor in urban planning at ASU, and he's considered one of the foremost experts in the country on complete streets and on these very issues. So it might be good to, he is part of the Transportation Commission, but it would be great to reach out to him and ask for his thoughts on the plan.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. He did provide some input
Great.
when we come in, presented to the commission, sorry. But we could definitely reach out with him when we do our.
But he was involved in the original process. Okay. Okay.
But he's got all the data and studies at his fingertips, so he might be able to
Yeah,
provide.
we could definitely use him as a resource.
Right.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, with that, we're going to take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Jim.
There's one over at the library. I don't know if
Do you want to move it closer to you?
Yeah, we want to move
Here?
closer to me.
All right. You going? All right, we're going to go ahead and call the meeting back to order. Next item on our agenda is our solid waste programs and services update. We have Tony, Tanya, and Rosa. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council, Rosa Inchowski, Interim Director for Municipal Utilities. And to my left, we have Tanya Chavez, Interim Deputy Director for Municipal Utilities, and Tony Miano, Solid Waste Manager. I also like to acknowledge the rest of the team that's here tonight. And since some of them have been here since 5 a.m. working, I thought it would be nice to acknowledge them. We have Richard Martinez, our Solid Waste Supervisor. Richard, can you wave? Don Radcliffe, our Recycling Coordinator. Steve White, to my right behind me, our Planning and Research Analyst. Parish Spies, Management Assistant. And finally, Shannon Reed, who is our PIO, who works very hard on us communicating with the public. So tonight, we would like to take a few minutes, and we know it's late in the evening, just to give you an update on our solid waste services that we provide our community. We have seen some industry standards or industry trends that are changing how cities are deploying their services to their residents. We'd like to bring you up to speed on some of that, and then it's timely since we are conducting a rate study for solid waste that we will bring back to you in September 19th specifically. So we would like to get your high-level policy decisions on some of the items that Tanya and Tony will present.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. So as Rosa mentioned, this is an update on our solid waste program and services. This is tied to Council Priority 4, Sustainable Growth and Development, specifically Performance Measure 4.04, to achieve or exceed the Council adopted solid waste diversion rate by 2020. The baseline was developed in fiscal year 15-16, and as you can see from the chart, we have been steadily making progress with our residential diversion. We're currently at a 22.8% diversion rate. And over the last year, we've made great strides with our commercial diversion through our green waste and inert program, and we've nearly met our goal, and we're currently sitting at a rate of 24.2%. Today's presentation is going to highlight some of the programs and services that go into our solid waste rate study. Again, as Rosa mentioned, this is timely because we will be coming back to Council on September 16th at the work study session to make recommendations with our rates for calendar year 2021. While this presentation will focus on solid waste programs and services, we will need Council direction on a few of these items. This will help us to prepare for the September 19th presentation when we come back to you to talk about rates. Specifically, we would like, with the recent recycling market changes, staff will be seeking guidance on either maintaining our existing recycling program or exploring ways to reduce costs. Staff is also considering potentially a residential reroute to gain greater efficiencies within the community and help offset costs. We would like to engage with residents about the impacts that this reroute might have. We would come back to Council with feedback and an implementation plan at our next meeting. One of the other things other cities are doing is exploring the cost of relocating trash services to alleys to curbside. I understand that's a sensitive subject amongst Tempe residents, but it is an option that we wanted to provide Council. And lastly, staff is seeking the approval to explore the sale of commercial and compost inert materials to help offset our operational costs in our compost yards. This presentation is not about rates, but we did want to make Council aware of what our current solid waste rate is and how we compare to other cities. Services are not equal among cities, and it's hard to do a side-by-side comparison. We can provide more in-depth information in our upcoming rate study meeting to further outline what those services are. Tempe Solid Waste Services remains committed to enhancing the quality of life for residents by offering seamless service. We provide 3.7 million points of contact to residents annually, and we receive less than 1% in complaints. I have to tell you, any business would take that any day of the week. And this is a true testament and accomplishment of the professionalism and dedication to service that our staff has.
Where's Chandler?
Wait, we don't know. Where is Chandler?
South, I mean,
Chandler.
I look at the rates, you have everybody up there but Chandler.
We must have missed Chandler, Mayor.
We will make sure it's included in
Easily
September.
forgettable city.
16 and a quarter. It's completely contracted out according to Steve.
Their entire service, that's likely why it wasn't included. We used MAG information to provide
Okay.
this. Thanks, Steve. Tempe is one of the leaders in the Valley in terms of our commitment to sustainability. And for example, we were the first city in the Valley to implement a blue bin recycling program. We are also the first city in the Valley to collect green organics, reuse it at city facilities, and provide it to our residents for free.
As you may be aware, the recycling market has crashed. Other cities within the state have already opted out of the recycle program. In 2012, we used to receive $600,000 annually from processing recyclable materials. Today, we pay about $450,000 to $500,000 to process recycled materials. So that's $1 million swing to our bottom line. Right now, to landfill a ton of solid waste trash, it's $25.56 gate rate, and it costs $69.02 to process recycling. So Surprise and Casa Grande has recently started landfilling their material, and the city of Tucson has opted to go to every other week collection to help offset their costs. The market is not expected to recover anytime soon, as this will impact our bottom line in our rate study. Even with these market changes, staff has managed to increase our diversion rate through the pilot third container green organics program, our bi-monthly bulk trash separation program, and our inert program. And the inert program is fairly new to us. That's dirt, rock, block, and most of that material gets reused in other projects. We are seeking council direction to either maintain our recycle program as is, or back off to reduce costs until the market makes a recovery. In 2015, we rerouted the whole city to reduce equipment and the carbon footprint. In 2018, staff has collected data from our new routing software, and we learned that we could be more efficient moving living units and tonnage to new collection days. This would be a cost saving to residential collection. As you can see by the slide, our current collection days is Mondays and Thursdays north of the US 60, and Tuesdays and Fridays south of the US 60. Our potential collection days would go to Monday to Thursday, and the US 60 would not be the boundary. We would reroute according to living units and tonnage. And so there would be a difference in collection days to some of the residents. So staff would like to work with neighborhood services to connect with residents to learn the impacts of these new changes. In December of 2016, staff has implemented a pilot green organics third container program. We tested all 4 zip codes in Tempe. The first container is free, and the second container or more is $5 a piece. Over the last 2 years, we've evaluated our set out rate, tonnage, and operational costs to serve these locations. As you can see, the Tuesday route is the most efficient route, collecting 926 tons. That's more than all 3 routes collected on the other days. So even though this program means a lot,
You go first, then I'll
I
go.
think you had the same question, I can tell.
What area of town was it?
okay, so it's South Tempe, over by Warner area, Warner Road.
Where the
that
horses
route.
are?
Yes. In the larger lots.
Just wanted to make sure.
Correct. Yes.
Got that on the record.
And so even though some of the neighborhoods love this program, it's not efficient for us to drive up and down the streets to pick up 1 or 2 containers. So when we looked at reevaluating and moving our assets, containers and trucks, we would wind up pulling those containers from some of those areas, which some of them are in North Tempe. We would still keep those routes. We still want the spread of 4 days a week collection, but there are some neighborhoods and pieces of neighborhoods that we would remove service. And so in a rate study, we want to evaluate our full cost recovery and formalize this pilot program moving forward in the future. We understand Tempe residents love their alleys. As you can see from the pictures, these are some of the challenges that staff deals with on a daily basis. In 2014, management created the Alley Maintenance Program. That's called AMP, is what we call it. This team works hard to educate residents to remove vegetation and debris from the alleys according to what the bulk trash schedule is. There is approximately 200 miles of alleys in the city of Tempe, and our goal is to recondition 40 miles a year annually. So our question to council is, do you want staff to explore costs to relocate trash service from alleys to curbside? Our commercial operations. Regionally, there are challenges in the commercial industry. Legislation was passed to allow apartments 5 and above to leave city service not too long ago. With that was a monopoly for most cities. And so now that is a hit to our bottom line. We still have challenges on a daily basis with collection. And looking at the chart over the last 4 years, staff has done a great job managing these obstacles through operational efficiencies. Tempe is committed to serving our residents and commercial businesses alike. We serve 1,300 businesses today, and we provide them a collection service that could be costly with larger haulers. So we are looking to adjust our rates to be cost neutral in their upcoming rate study. On a good note, staff has been able to meet our commercial diversion rate of 25%. We're at 24.2. We started in 2014 with one route with 100 recycle containers. Today we have 5 routes a week with 740 containers. And the collection of inert material and construction debris has greatly improved our diversion rate. Staff is most proud of the creation of our compost and inert yard. 2014, we started with 3 acres, and we were just starting a pilot program to compost our bulk trash products. Today, the facility is 8 acres, and it consists of a state-certified scale and scale house and dedicated staff and equipment to process commercial-grade compost and inert materials. In fiscal year 18-19, we processed about 10,000 tons. And we are on track to process 20,000 tons by the end of this year. So staff is closing the trash loop by repurposing trash instead of landfilling it. As Tanya mentioned earlier in the presentation, Tempe is one of the only cities in the valley to collect green organics and reuse it at city facilities. We recently started utilizing inert material also. We've been collaborating with parks, golf, engineering, and water to divert and reuse products at city facilities. And staff is reusing products as alley dust suppression, where we use crushed asphalt, ground palm fronds, and screen rock instead of landfilling the material in our alleys.
So to circle back, we are seeking council direction on, have a better understanding on Tempe's commitment to our current recycling program. We'd like direction on how we should proceed with that. We'd also like to get council permission to engage residents on the potential of rerouting the city and what impacts that would have on them. Explore costs of relocating trash to curbside is also an option. And lastly, we'd like to seek approval to explore the sale of commercial grade compost and inert materials that would allow us to offset the operational costs of that facility. We have some great potential there.
Okay. First, thank you guys for this great information. I'm absolutely committed to the recycling program. I'm sure we're going to hear from the rest of the council on that. I think that, cities have to show that recycling industry, we have to show the recycling industry that there's a viable market here in the U.S. And we're going to have to start building this market from the ground up. And I know with my work from the U.S. Conference of Mayors, that they have seen several U.S. paper mills coming back online. So the more that we continue to recycle, I think that's something that we need to show that industry as we move forward. And I know there's some other opportunities out there. I think Boise is another. I know City of Phoenix is looking with a company in Boise, Idaho, with some of the plastics, because that's coming back, that we should probably look at as well. I do realize that we're going to have to make some changes to our recycling program, and I'm open to having that discussion, for the greater good. I do agree with the staff's recommendation on the residential collection days. But in order to do that, as Tanya mentioned, we really have to have a robust education outreach program why we're going Monday through Thursday as opposed to the Fridays.
So
I
we're
think-
actually looking to engage and find the impacts before we even come back with that recommendation. So we've done a preliminary evaluation of our data, and we know that we can gain efficiencies and cost savings, but we want to make sure we really engage with residents because we know people love their trash and their containers in the days of the week, and so we want to see what impacts that would have on them before we come back with a recommendation.
The green organics, I think is great that we had this pilot program. I know we have 2,800 plus homes that are involved in it, and it spans throughout the city. But also, again, it comes back to education, letting you know what we can and can't do, when they're going to be picked up. I think, and I am fine if you're going to try to sell it. I think that's great. And I love the reuse aspect of it from not only the green organics, but also the inert materials that you have. I think that's something new that we're seeing more. Alley maintenance program, I don't think I have to tell you where I am on that. There's a lot of unintended consequences proposing something like that. I do know there is a benefit of having someone in the alley once a week throughout the city. So I think that's something that you should look at. And I would caution that because I hear from a lot of residents throughout the city how much they like their alleys. So that's just a thought there. The commercial collection, I met with Tony and Tanya on that, as well as Rosa. We do provide a valuable service. I think a lot of that goes with marketing, letting businesses know, hey, here's another option for you, as opposed to some of the private sectors out there. That's something that we should be looking at as well. I'm really proud of the compost and the inert operations that you guys are moving forward. So, Councilman Navarro.
Thank you, Mayor. I first want to say I'm so impressed with the data. I mean, this is just outstanding, the information, seriously, that you guys can provide, and us trying to make a very good, educated decision. I'm just thrilled with it because so many cities probably are getting there, but are not often there with what we're trying to do and achieve, and how we can sell and educate ourselves and educate our community, because education is going to be a big part of this whole thing on trying to keep things going in the right direction. Because obviously, the recycling I do not want to get rid of, and I think that it's even for me, because I know I'm bad, is just educating the users on what is recyclable, how do we recycle. And I think there's just more to it when it comes down to recycling and the message that we can send out. And I think if the city has the access and the ability to really, take hold of this, I think there's a true opportunity for us to be on the leading edge of the type of education that we can try to provide our citizens and try to get to a better place when it comes to recycling. But everything the mayor said, I mean, I totally agree with, and I'm pretty proud of it.
Councilmember Keating.
Thank you, Mayor. I think it was like a Vice News or something I saw, and essentially the gist of it was they were taking recycling, cities were having recycling picked up, and that stuff was just going to a landfill.
Yeah.
Do we know that the items collected in the city of Tempe are actually being recycled? Do we know that we're getting what we paid for?
Right now, we work with Waste Management as our provider, and we receive revenue on some of the materials. Some materials, we don't receive any revenue right now because the market's crashed. But we feel the majority of our material is getting processed. Now, there are some, styrofoams, plastic film. We've always landfilled those. Those were never in our recycle program. We've always taken plastic bottles, juice containers, shampoo containers. But some of those other materials always were not really part of our program. In years, people have put them in the blue container. Waste sometimes sold them if the market was good, but right now the market is completely shut down. So those plastics have been and always in the future probably will be landfilled. And that's styrofoam, plastic films, bulky plastic, large plastic items.
So we can say with certainty that Tempe's recycling isn't being dumped in a landfill in China.
We have a meeting set up with Waste just to verify, because again, I'm using in good faith our contract with Waste Management that they're recycling and selling our products on the market.
And a second question. Was there any, maybe this is the second bullet point, I'm not sure, was there any thought about going to every other week? If so, do we have an idea of what how much money that could save?
So one of the things we would still look at, we would save some miles driven, but with the equipment, because it takes a year to process. So our equipment, if we order one today, it takes a year to get it. So to give up the equipment, we wouldn't see a savings in that. And so there may be some staffing savings, but we always have vacancy turnover rate. So we can take a look at that in our rate study and see what, and come back September 19th with a cost for that.
So I'm not indicative of the average Tempean probably, I live by myself, one person. I go through a lot of Fresca though. And even then, I only put out my bin like once every third week really. So I don't know, I think maybe there's some opportunity to save some stuff there. So you fill up your stuff every week?
Yeah, kids.
Every week. You guys
Well, I think
I'm
another
like serious.
I think another thing to consider is, then you have the potential of using up landfill space. So if you're only recycling every other week, then that's the weeks that they're not recycling, they're landfilling. So if all the cities were to go to that model, we would eventually use up our landfill space in a much faster rate than we would normally if we were recycling.
So you're saying people would throw stuff in the trash bin rather than the recycling
The
bin?
week they're not getting recycling, they would typically do that.
And long term, we feel this is just a short hiccup in the recycle program. We don't really want to lose that momentum. We have a very good, robust recycle program in Tempe. Our contamination rate or residue rate is very low compared to all other cities in the valley. And so right now we feel very comfortable if we keep the momentum going and wait for those manufacturers to come back and see a change in the commodities.
Is there any, so if we're losing $500,000 annually, is this like a rate study issue? Was there any look at, could we increase the rates to make up for that on a temporary basis to make it so, look, we're not paying $500,000 to recycle? I like to see us break even or get back to turning a profit on that.
And that's something that maybe we'll look at in the rate study.
Right.
Is look at right now we're looking at all of our cost of service in our rate study.
Excellent, thank you.
Robin, and then Councilmember
Thank you, Mayor.
Adams,
Just
then
a couple
Vice Mayor.
really things. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you for having Councilmember Chin and myself out to solid waste a few Fridays ago. I mean, it was really great, enlightening. I appreciated the tour to be able to go and check out exactly what we're talking about right here. So nothing better than having a presentation in like real life. So I certainly do appreciate that and all the hard work from your team. I mean, they're pretty remarkable. So that's really good. I agree with the mayor. I'm definitely committed to the recycle program. And I hope you're right, Tony. I hope it's just kind of a glitch in the system that, in a few years that'll come back around and we'll be able to not necessarily make money on it, but maybe even break even. I think that would be great. And I want to say just kudos to the outreach for educating people on recycling, because I think that's one of the things that's been happening. And you see it all on, Facebook and social media, and people are talking about what items go in the recycle bin. So to the team that's actually putting that word out, you guys are doing a really good job. So thank you for doing that, because I think the neighbors are talking about it and washing out all their containers and not putting their pizza boxes in it. So, I mean, I think there is a lot of education, and that's one thing I think we always need to continue to do, because I think that's a really positive thing. So nice job with that. And I know Councilmember Keene kind of mentioned it, I kind of the same way. We don't necessarily put our recycle bin out all the time, but I don't know if that's cost saving to get people not to put it out. I mean, we still would do pickup, but if there's not enough in your recycle bin, is it worthy to say, hey, if maybe some type of a campaign that if it's not full, don't put it out until it is. And I don't even know if that saves any money, because they still have to be on the route, but something to think about, maybe a happy medium. Yeah, and then I would say, when you talk about the reroute, working on that, we haven't done anything since we said 2015 was the last time we looked at it. And I think there's been a lot of evolution in the last 4 years. So definitely one of the things I think that we need to explore. I think we need to talk to the residents, but also I think it's important to talk to the drivers too, because they're the ones that are doing the work and it's going to impact them. So I would really, hopefully that, you look back into the team and make sure that, everybody understands, what maybe the unintended consequences may be before we put people in a bad situation, especially our employees, because I want to make sure we're looking after them, because they work really, really hard. So I want to make sure that's one thing that's incorporated when it comes to
A 4-day weekend was something that they were digging. So
That's
Yeah,
good.
yeah, well, and I just want to make sure that we're being aware of those things. So I think it's really important that we hear from them. And when it comes to the relocate trash services to the curbside, I've really expressed my opinion on that many times. To be honest, I don't want you guys to spend a lot of time with outreach if it's something that we probably is never going to come to fruition. So I certainly do have a lot of concerns about, moving forward with that. And the compost program, the green organics, I will tell you, I think that you have really grown, you and your team, Tony and Tanya, and in regards to what we're doing with our compost program. So if you hadn't had a chance to check it out over there, I would highly encourage not only our council to be able to go see it, but our residents, I think, probably don't even realize, what great work is happening there. But at the same time, I don't want to lose perspective of what our primary mission is too. And I don't want to, utilize a lot of resources in regards to creating compost and closing the loop, like you mentioned, which I think is really important. But if it's costing us more money to do that, I think we need to really just kind of self-reflect a little bit and make sure that's what we want to do. So it's to me, if we can get to a point where you can explore ways to, at least try to stay somewhat cost neutral or close to cost neutral, I think that's going to be one of the things that's really important. Because it's great to do the right thing. But I think every time it costs us money to do the right thing, that comes from our residents' pockets. So we need to just be, I think, really transparent about what that looks like in regards to the resources we're spending on that. And I'm hopeful because I love that program. I think it is a really great program that we're able to close the loop, like you mentioned, Tony. And I would just say I think you guys are doing a really good job. I think it's nice to be able to look and reflect on what we're doing and how we can do it better. So I know it's not an easy task, but you have a really great team and you guys are doing a lot of really good work. So thank you for that.
Yes, great work on the presentation, and it's really nice to see Rosa and her team present this tonight. Rosa, you've done a great job at turning this program around, so congratulations to you. I'm completely committed to recycling, just for the record, and I am not interested in closing the alleys at all. I had a lot of feedback when I was campaigning, and people love their alleys. We also, those vehicles, if memory serves me, they're about $350,000 a piece, correct?
Correct.
Tony? And what happens, I don't want us to be short-sighted, because what happens is a lot of times if cities get out of the business, they sell all their vehicles and then they're stuck with a contract. And then it's very expensive for them to try to get back in the business if they change their minds, because contracts will change and they'll go up a lot. So I just want us to be really careful about, staying in the business. We can do this. We'll figure it out. That's the kind of city we are. And so I just wanted to, communicate that. And, taking the recycling out or not, if it's not full, I know that our fleet department spends a lot of time helping the solid waste trucks with their brakes and things. So maybe that would be something that we could look into. And so I know it would save them a lot of brake jobs if we don't have to stop all the time if the cans aren't full. And then I just wanted to ask about what your public outreach plan is for this area.
For the area of recycling, or
for the community, as far as the recycling and what are we going to do for making sure our residents know what's happening and what's that going to look like?
Well, we have an extensive outreach program for all of our programs and services. And so we've got a dedicated staff and not a dedicated PIO, but we've got a PIO that assists with that we do neighborhood meetings, pretty much every city sanctioned event, game night out, tour to Tempe, Tardiata, any place that we can get tabling space, we participate in. Neighborhood association meeting, HOAs. We utilize pretty much every mechanism the city has to be able to assist with outreach. And something new that we started this year was contamination audits. So we're really working with residents on streamlining what they're putting into the can, the top 10 in the bin. As Councilmember Arredondo Savage commented, every now and then you'll see a post about putting used Play-Doh container in recycling, and you'll get 250 comments about that. So residents are definitely engaged. We do outreach at the schools and other measures, but with our upcoming rate study, we've already started the process on the outreach for that. We've got a website dedicated to the rate study, and then we'll be doing additional outreach methods. We'll have public meetings, presentation to the Sustainability Commission, Neighborhood Advisory Commission, and various kind of outreach to get feedback from residents as we go through this rate study and kind of formalize some of the programs that are still pilot, and then feedback on the rates.
Okay, that sounds like a model outreach program to me. So thank
We're
you. I
really trying
appreciate it.
to also think about bilingual communication. We know that rate study is kind of sometimes very difficult for people to understand how that really impacts them, and trying to use very simple language that people understand why would we even outreach, how this impacts their life. So I think we're looking at some of that also.
Great. Thank you so much.
Vice Mayor Cubey.
So last year, the Waste Management Open, they decided to have a waste management forum focused on recycling, and they looked at around the Valley cities to see which cities were leading the way, and you can guess that Tempe was considered that city, and they asked myself and Braden Kay, our Sustainability Director, to participate in that forum. And there's a lot of ongoing discussions and information sharing, and some of which has led to, the real adoption and embrace of our canvassing program, where we talk to residents about contamination. And I want to tell you that I went to pick up my granddog at my daughter's house, and her recycling bin was full of non-recyclable items, so I took a picture and I reported her. It felt great. Anyway, so we might be reporting on each other. That's all right. So I bring this all up because we've known this is coming. It's a crisis to everyone right now, but we've known this crisis was upon us, and I firmly believe that with crisis comes opportunity. And you're bringing up the alleyway study, and I hear some folks dismissing it. I think that there are neighborhoods in Tempe that may be willing to pilot such a program. I know that Brentwood Cavalier has spoken to me in meetings, neighborhood meetings. They said, consider us to be your #1 pilot for anything innovative you want to do related to recycling and related to sustainability. So I don't think we should completely give up on the idea, even if it's a reduced idea where there may be some neighborhoods like with our feral cat program that we're looking at that really see the need and are willing to face this crisis directly and say, we want to be part of the solution. So that's one thing. Then the other crisis I like to identify is, and you mentioned it, Tony, the legislature has put some impediments in our way with some preemption laws. And we are going to have a discussion in November about our legislative priorities. And I think that we need to somehow, as a group with the Arizona League of Cities, reach back to the legislature, talk about SB 1241, which banned plastic bag bans, and also banned cities from regulating styrofoam or any kind of container. I mean, the depth and breadth of that bag ban is ridiculous. And then there's SB 1079, which really upset our whole commercial market and upended the profits that we were making from the commercial market. So there's ways that the legislature might be able to get involved and help cities to cope with this crisis and make this crisis less impactful to our budgets and to our residents. So I think that in our November legislative priorities, I would like to see us address the crisis and how the legislature, if they're not going to repeal those laws, and see what ways can they help us. Because if Surprise is recognizing this as a crisis, we're all recognizing this as a crisis. It's not a surprise to the rest of us. So, so I would love to see that. If the council members agree that just to see how that priority can be integrated into our legislative priorities. And lastly, RISN, which is a Resource Innovation Solutions Network. It's a project with Valley Cities, especially Phoenix and ASU. They have a trash to cash model, and you mentioned talking about the circular economy and ways we can look to make income from what we perceive or we might perceive as trash. I'm very interested in that. And there's a company that developed out of RISN called Recyclops. And what they do is they pick up all plastic materials, with the exception of the really hard shell plastic that I don't think we even recycle, and all the dry cleaner bags and plastic bags and soft plastic, and they take styrofoam as well. And they actually prove it. They use it. It's not thrown away. It's not melted. It's not incinerated for energy. It is in pollutants created. They actually, it is a trash to cash model. I know Phoenix has adopted it. I think they're piloting it in a certain neighborhood. And so I know we were speaking, Tony, and you said that you thought it was more with cities that don't have regular pickup. But this has the opportunity, if we're just exploring the idea, I would love to see an exploration. It may not fit us, but again, it could be a pilot. And under their model, sometimes cities pay for it, but often it's the consumer that pays for it, $4 or $5 a month. But they can put all their plastic and know it's actually getting recycled. It's not just going to some bin or perhaps even going to landfill, because you never know. But if we could see, I don't know if it's part of the process, just an exploration of recyclops, because they seem to be coming up with a solution that is adapting to this crisis, this local to global crisis and the global to local crisis. And that's it. Thank you. Thank you for all your hard work.
Okay. I think you got a lot of feedback.
I think we're clear, and just to reiterate, we will move forward with Tempe's commitment to recycling, explore cost savings to commercial sale of our compost to inert materials, and explore and work with the community on the rerouting suggestions that we may have as we explore for distribution, and not touch
We're good.
anything else.
And could we look
Thank
at
you.
recyclops? Is that
Oh, the recycling, yeah.
recyclops?
Yep, we already done that.
Right in here.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next item, digital community engagement, public tool.
Hi, Mayor and Council. Elizabeth Higgins, Chief of Staff to the Mayor and Council. I am coming to update you on this. Last year, Council had asked that staff explore a digital community engagement / public input tool, which after all of the things that we've talked about tonight that we want to engage the public on, it's a pretty apt discussion to have right now. So just coming back with an update on that, and to tell you a little bit, the memo goes into some of the digital platforms that the city already uses to communicate to our public. So if you had any questions about those, I'm here to answer those as well. But in the process of exploring what sort of digital community engagement and input tool we could use, we sort of realized that a lot of departments in the cities don't have a centralized repository for all of the public input that we are bringing in. So there's a lot of input that we gather, and it is in people's file folders on their desktop. And how do you make that data something that we can use and you know, as dashboards and all of these types of things. So we were looking at going a little bit wider than the initial charge to staff to look at a public tool that would help with council communicators, and instead look at how we can better track more of the public input that comes into the city with a variety of departments that gather that input for us. And so as part of that process, staff met several times. We actually had a needs assessment workshop that we put together, where we put everything that we thought a tool that would be helpful to us, you know, on the board, and we sort of ranked those things. And I can give you a quick summary of some of the things that we thought would be important. It should have an easy to filter system that can create reports, easily upload data, have a public polling function with a dashboard for all of this data to be visually displayed, a two-way interaction to generate two-way dialogue, some easy interfacing with the city's other IT capabilities, because we definitely want those things to be able to interface. The ability to create custom contact lists based on issues, events, geography, demographics, and not council specific lists as well, because I know you often have your notification list that you like to send information to. The staff should be able to track the previous contacts from residents or that previous input, and then any type of system that we should get would also be interactive with maps and video, chat functions, something like that. So we're looking at putting together an RFI or possibly an RFP based on council direction. And so hopefully coming back to you to hear what you wanted this tool to be, and to hear if we're missing anything, if there's any gaps, if you see some areas for improvement, or to share what exactly, if we've missed it, what you're looking for.
Councilmember Keating, then Vice Mayor Keating.
So I'm the one who made this initial request. It was after attending the National League of Cities meeting in November, was it, in Los Angeles? Anyway, and my main concern was to look at the council communicator tool, which is really outdated, and it's impossible to sort of chart and look back for previous correspondence, and it's just a headache, and it just seems so it seemed like a dinosaur in our interactions with our residents, and so hard to keep track of issues. Like, say someone wants a crossing light at a certain intersection, and like 4 years later it finally gets completed. We should be able to reach back to that person and let them know. Like, there's just so many different ways to interact. So and it was kind of a while back that we made this initial request. So it turned into a all-inclusive, let's get everything under one system. I don't think that's possible. I honestly don't, from talking to some people in the industry about it. And I'm more interested in, you may want to take that aspect of, well, the public forum, the online forum maybe, and putting it into all the other feedback items that we have, feedback mechanisms we have for city services, commenting in city services, put that into an RFP or look at that differently. That's okay. I know we've signed on to we've committed to those contracts for a while, so we actually do have to delay that. But for the council communicator tool, I don't want to wait a year. I feel it's essential. We've been waiting a year just to hear back. There are companies out there that do this, that are really effective, that are innovative. We adopted the OpenGov programming from a National League of Cities contact and learning about it there. There's programs that are $12,000 to $20,000 or even less as a council communicator tool, and that's something that I don't feel like it's jumping the line in the budget process. It'd be something that hopefully with contingency funds or some sort of city manager funds that we could accomplish, but I just feel like we're in a little bit of a crisis mode with the way we communicate with our residents, and I want to have tools to communicate better with the residents who write to us, because someone who takes the time to write to us and email us is probably the most informed and engaged citizen there is, and I just don't feel like we do justice in the current system we have. And I just can't stress enough that I think we need to separate this out. Council communicator is one thing. All the others, I understand the integration and how we get feedback for all these other city services, but for council communication, we really need to do something. I find that it's an urgent problem.
Councilmember Keating?
Well, I didn't expect that. You know, I think this is great. Like, I think anything we can do to not only enhance our communication, but build up our database of who's talking about what and when. I love the idea of being able to identify when people email us if they even live in the city, or, you know. So I think that I would prefer a more robust option that you're looking at. I don't think our council communicator system's in crisis right now. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I thought this was gonna be an easy thing. I was like, hey, go do it. It sounds awesome. Go do it. So that's kind of where I'm at in this.
One thing I would suggest is to get information. If you can find the information that Vice Mayor Cubey found at League of Cities and Towns, what that software program is. The only thing I would caution us on is you have to make sure whatever program we get can integrate with the existing system. Otherwise, you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars that's not going to get to where we want to get. So you'd rather get it right. And that's where a lot of cities and municipalities across the state of Arizona, having worked in this industry for a little bit, they work in silos, and each department spends something on some type of software program that doesn't really necessarily integrate. So then you miss the mark of what you're trying to accomplish. Yes. So I would work with our IT staff to see basically this looks like a CRM, like a client relations management software type product, that whatever we have that can help with the council communicator, but also make sure that it communicates with our 311, with whatever Public Works is doing and so forth, because that integration saves a lot of time and staff money. And there's so many efficiencies that you can get as a city with technology, and we really need to explore that, because there's a lot of stuff that happens that we just spend a lot of money and then not getting the results that we're looking for. So
we do have a technology and innovation subcommittee that we would run anything through that.
Councilman Redondo Savage?
Yeah, Mrs. Higgins, thank you. You did a really thorough job, and I certainly do appreciate it. But I agree with what I've heard in regards to basically creating some more synergy and some efficiencies. And I always think we could do better. I'm looking forward to doing that. So I certainly support the idea of, like Councilmember Keating said, moving forward and really trying to see what this looks like. I am not ready to approve it and put it through the budget process at this time, But I think once we get some more of that information back, I think we can talk about that then. I think that's
Councilman Kitty?
Just a quick suggestion. I know you guys have software in mind already, and I'm not sure how this compares to what I'm going to suggest, but at Avnet, we implemented a customer service, customer relations software called Jive, and it sounds like it does all the things Councilmember Kuby or Vice Mayor Kuby's talking about and all the things that staff is talking about. So it might just be like a price differential. I have no idea, but that's just something that was a really robust system as far as I can see everything Randy Keating has sent to the city. I can put tags on the different issues that I'm talking about, things like that. So, and there's all kinds of like gamification you can do. I don't know. I mean, if you guys have something you like, great, but maybe just take a look at that and see maybe it makes more sense to go with one or the other. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there because we had a lot of success with it at Avnet.
Okay. Yeah, there's not a specific one in mind at this point.
Vice Mayor?
I just wanted to bring up, the fact with our council communicator system, we don't quantify the complaints that come in, and it's not as if, 100 for this, 80 for this, we're going to vote a certain way. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but there should be a way to track and identify that. We track and identify all other complaints or issues that come through 311 or through our online portal. So there seems to be, but the council communicator stands alone, and that doesn't have that function. And there's this large distribution list, so everybody gets that. I don't know if that's, staff would have to tell me. I don't know if that's something that's appreciated or not, that such a large distribution list gets so many different emails from our residents. And then it's really hard to find and go back. I mean, obviously there's a search engine on Outlook, but it's really hard to go back and find certain emails from certain people around certain issues. And there's a way to quantify that and make that better. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a part of this huge system that I honestly don't think is going to satisfy all our needs. And again, we waited too long, and so we had to sign on to the contract again for all our different systems. So I think we could look at some of this piecemeal, at least the council communicator aspect, because we know there are cities that have more up-to-date and less antiquated council communicator systems.
There was the Tempe forum was renewed as part of this, but there could be a polling function could be separate from a CRM that it sounds like you might be more focused on for focusing on the type of data that is coming in from emails and other public input that is also coming in.
Anything else? So move forward with options for us?
Sure.
Okay. Next is future agenda items. Anybody have any future agenda items? Councilman Navarro?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I do, or I would like, if the council would like, to talk about bollards within the downtown Tempe area. I know this is an issue that I constantly bring up for about 8 years, and the possibility of implementing them within the entertainment area that we do within the downtown area. It makes strategically sense. I think with what we're going through in our times also, it makes sense because of some additional safety. But I think the appeal and then the character of downtown Tempe, I think it's probably the smartest thing we would do, especially with our new light rail and our streetscapes and everything else that we're trying to achieve. But I know staff has looked into it. I know staff has also have some information, but however it may lay out through IRS or through a Cal committee, I think that information needs to be given to the council, and we need to make a decision on it.
Is the council in favor of moving forward with this item of bollards in a future meeting? Yes. Okay. So then we'll look at that. Anybody else?
I do have a future item, and I'd spoken to city manager and team about it and tried to act and do a little research about it this summer, wanting to respect staff time. And you all have heard of Dolores Huerta. She's an American hero. She's an Arizona hero and heroine. And so many cities and states across the country are actually adopting some kind of Dolores Huerta Day, whether it's a paid holiday or whether it's a community service day. So I reached out to the Dolores Huerta Foundation to quantify that and see what cities and states are adopting that. And I was speaking to this woman and talking about how amazing Dolores Huerta was, that she was the co-founder of the American Farm Worker Movement, and she didn't get a lot of credit for that because Cesar Chavez was also a co-founder, and he maybe not have been his fault, but he got most of the credit. She invented the phrase "si se puede." She's out in California now helping domestic care workers to get a higher wage. I mean, she's 90 90 years old, 90 plus years old, and she's doing amazing work in the social justice movement to this very day. So I had this great talk with this woman, and I was just going off, just like I am now, like motor mouth and really intense. And then she said, you know, I'm really honored by what you're saying. I'm like, what? She said, I'm Dolores Huerta. You're talking to Dolores Huerta. And I was just so blown away because it was like 5:30 in the afternoon in California, and she was at her foundation and she was handling the phone calls. And isn't that so like Dolores Huerta? Anyway, I would like Tempe to consider the possibility of adopting either a community service day, wouldn't necessarily have to be a paid day of work off, but a day where we would dedicate in the community to a community service project, or even consider a paid holiday. I'm not sure. I would just like us to look at different options, and we could talk to the foundation about what is presently out there and see what Tempe might be willing to do. So what do you think, Council?
Councilman Adams?
Yes, I'm in favor of that idea. I think it's a great idea. We should move forward with it.
Okay. We'll come back with options of whether it's a service day and if there's a cost associated with the paid holiday. That's something that's completely different. And the city manager can get back to us on that. But I think we're generally in favor of a service day or something of recognizing. Is that good with council?
Yep.
Okay. All right. With that, move on. The next item is our agenda is a call to the audience for the committee of the whole listed under item section 4A. Audience members have up to 3 minutes to address the city council. If you'd like to speak on an item, please fill out a speaker's card, which can be located in the back of the council chambers or history museum. If there's anyone in the audience that'd like to speak to the council, could you please get my attention now? Seeing none. Committee of the whole items. Items 4A is items that are ready for city council direction or status update. And item 4A1 is the Desert Conservation Commission.
Mayor, I'll go ahead and start that.
Okay, Councilman Navarro.
And I think Elizabeth might help me out on this too. Basically, as it's read is requesting the council's direction for establishing a desert conservation commission that would be used to advise the council on policies and protect and enhance the natural, floral, historical, and cultural aspects and unique uses of the desert park. Tempe's portion would be Papco Park and Hayden View Park. Just simply said, it's just a commission that would give guidance as we do certain things in there. And I use Papco Park when we've gone in there with different entities to help either cut through vegetation or take out vegetation. I think it would be advantageous for the city, especially the two so-called gyms that we have that are connected to our lake, connected to the Papco Park and the Buttes. We want to make sure that we're protecting our historical landmarks, and we want to make sure we're taking care of our desert and also our vegetation. I think it's something that I'm gonna have to give credit to Kim and Darlene. They have not been here, but I know they've been really big advocates of getting this going, and I think it's worthwhile to recognize that they, and also a lot of people agree that having expertise within the desert region just is going to add value to make sure that we're doing things right and properly. And we're also having and continuing on with deep respect with the Indian community, which has been highly supported by that community and many other communities. When we took a poll on this, this is obviously widely and highly respected in terms of a definite need for a conservation committee.
Okay. Sounds good.
So,
Vice Mayor?
Yes, I just commend you for your work. I think this is a fantastic idea. Just a slight word of warning. So the last commissions we created was the Family Justice Commission and the Sustainability Commission. And since then, we had to change the membership for the vacancies and the appointments because we kind of had made it too restrictive. We only, I think, had 2 at-large members, and we tried to define so clearly who we wanted on there that it kind of hampered us sometimes in getting the right members. So I don't know if you consider having another at-large, or I think there were 2 related to conservation, education, or having knowledge, scholarly knowledge of conservation. I don't know if you want to consider amending it slightly.
Yeah, and I want to step back and I'll also recognize Councilmember Adams. She has really been a big part of this in helping us out and getting things going. But Keating too, you were there? Keating was there. I'd like to recognize Councilman Keating being strategically important in this committee. Thank you. You know, what we established and when the committee starts, there's going to be you know, obviously we have the guidance of what they need to have for a structure. But once the committee has started to formulate, I think it's the opportunity to kind of make some tweaks as needed to either the language or the members or any challenges that they might come across. And I'm hoping that the committee can probably have some input on that. And Elizabeth, I don't know if there's anything else.
The only thing I want to add is, I know a member of the public got up and spoke. I think we do have on there a resident from a tribal nation needs to be on there. That's one of the individuals listed.
It was just not in the memorandum. It was on the original. And that's
Got it. Just want to let you know. All right, I think we're good with that. Thank you. Next item. Items for new council consideration. Human trafficking.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members Navarro and Chin for agreeing to be on this working group. I have a spiel on this in the interest of making our kickball game. You just want to move forward.
Okay.
All right.
All right, move forward.
Go for it.
Thank you.
All right, next item is items in progress. Any updates or anything? Yes? Councilwoman, Madam?
Annexation of the County Island. We are looking at that, exploring more opportunities. That is going to be east of Rural Road, north of the 202. We did get some information back from the county that was more positive than we expected, and I'm very optimistic that we're going to be able to get this done. So.
All right. With that, Mr. Manager, you have any announcements?
We have another item. We have another item in progress.
Okay. What is it?
Micromobility.
Okay.
All right. We're requesting another 90 days. It's in the packet just to talk about scooter licensing and bike safety.
I forgot the 90 days too.
All right.
We need
Are you good with that?
We need another 90 days too, Mark.
Approve what? You gonna request it? Another 90 days?
Yes. I'm
For the
requesting a
annexation?
90 day.
Okay. So move, is everybody good with that?
Yep.
Yes, and I think we can take small house community off, can we not?
We could take the small house community, otherwise known as tiny house dwellings. We could take it off the list. Yes.
Taking one for the team.
There you
And
go.
also Tempe Works, Randy, isn't that also?
We're still working with staff on that.
Close.
With some waiting Leanne's to get me some information. Yeah, you're shaking your head over there. I see you.
So are you okay to taking that off?
No.
Okay, no.
Soon.
All right. With that, Mr. Manager, you have any announcements?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. She's not here, but I wanted to officially welcome Jonae Harrison. That's Tempe's new Equity and Inclusion Manager who started yesterday.
Okay.
We're really excited to have her aboard.
And with that, the only announcement I have is we have a first ASU football game this Thursday against Kent State. Hope to see everybody there. With that, we're adjourned.